So it looks like we're live. Hello, Sherry.
Hello, Nate.
Sherry has joined me. At least Sherry has joined me. Hopefully there were some people that expressed some conversation or expressed some interest in this conversation earlier. So hopefully there'll be some more folks joining us as I stumble over my own tongue today. Today we were going to talk about. Oh, we have Tyler joining us.
Hey, I was trying to get my video to work, but it's
I was really scared to click on that, Tyler, because I've been in a couple of live streams with
I can remove you until you get your video working.
I can work on it while I'm present. I think
all right.
I think I have some idea about how to work on it. But,
so I kind of explained the subject in the title a little bit, but essentially what I want to do, and I don't think I have any answers to this, but I want to talk about strategies for dealing with the machine. Essentially, what is the right way? Or maybe there's more than one right way. What are the better ways?
Should we get
to deal with machine?
Should we get really brainy and ask what the machine means to you?
No, I think we should, like, for people who might join or watch it later and have no idea what we're talking about. The machine is a concept that Paul Kingsnorth is the contemporary person most known for using the phrase "the machine." It's sort of a constellation of ideas that is connected to, I would say, Jacques Ellul's idea of technique, and some of William Blake's thought. It's connected to the fact that we, in the post-Enlightenment era, live in a dead, unenchanted world. Like, it's a whole constellation of ideas, but the concept of the machine deals with how automated the entire thing is, how the thing just kind of runs on its own momentum, and how we get trapped in it and transformed by it. All these, like, systems of control that promise to make us free but end up enslaving us. It's related to the technocracy. I think it's like, I don't want to be overly simplistic, because it's actually like, it's a pretty complex constellation of ideas that are at play in defining the machine. I would say that, to me, the concept of the machine is very much aligned with what Tom Berg is talking about when he talks about the closed world of the serpent. It's the world that looks only with the view of the that lives only in the horizontal.
Yay!
Hey,
me made it.
Welcome, me.
It sounds really bad, like bad grammar.
Yeah, it's an error. It's an error in our addressing system.
So that's yeah. So that's my best attempt to. I'm that was probably more definition than most people would want, but that's
kind of particular to, like, the now. I think when I think about it in broader terms. Like, it's born out of a mechanistic worldview, for one thing, right? Where we
hence machine,
right? And I had another thought about it. It's a totalizing system, so it claims to be, like, not just totalizing in the sense that it captures you and you have no way out, but it actually claims to solve all the problems that we have, right? So, and in that, it does capture you, you know. Yeah. So anyway, those were a couple.
Wait. Okay. Can we just dive right in? Okay.
Yeah.
I think that part, that is an allure. That's an alluring part of it.
Yeah.
because there's always a carrot and a stick, right? There's polarities everywhere. That's an alluring part of it. But in a sense, the promise of ultimate salvation is the same thing, right?
Yes.
It's the allure of all things being healed and made right. What it seems like is the difference is, and if we look at the definition of machine here, if it's automated processes, I mean, we're surrounded by automated processes. My chain of reasoning goes something like this. Why are we talking about anything at all if we're not talking about how things could be otherwise? And if we're talking about how things could be otherwise, then we have to both envision a possibility that things can be otherwise, and then then we're confronted with the potentiality of that either being a delusion, but not being true, or something that we might reach via some possible path, right? Which is effort, it's motion and trajectory. It's a decision about what path you make to go somewhere. It's teleological. So this being the basis of all these things, what seems like the clear distinction to me is that when I talk about interfacing with anything other than a sense of being, I call it a machine because it's automatic. And I say that because it doesn't respond to my own desires as they presently are. So in other words, when I meet it, however it is, if my desires differ from what it's already doing, I have no sense that I can infect it or inject it or change it with my sense of desire. In fact, I feel like it diminishes mine to the point where I have no care or capacity in that thing. I can't alter it, it alters me. And the fundamental difference seems to be that, and this is I think this is where we always go with the absolute and the ultimate is, and this is really funny. I wrote a little poem about this in the Bridges of Meaning
Writer server.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the writer. Yeah. It was something like we cannot conceive of that which is inconceivable. It was a play on words about birth, I think. We cannot convince that which is inconvincible. So there's something about the way in which we petition reality, however we're perceiving it, which is a question about whether or not it is willing to change on our behalf in some manner, whatever that manner may be, or if we are required to change on its behalf. Right. And that's fundamentally the distinction that seems to matter. Because if I'm myself always engaging with and like filled up with automatic processes that I have no control over, like my liver or my kidney or cardiac system, whatever, I nevertheless have a sense that it is of me and with me and through me, right? So that's that distinction that we're searching for. And then I would say, and just to jump ahead and throw it and you take whatever you want, that ultimately what we're looking for is that the generator function or the source or the origin of these structures, these automatic processes, which are not of our own making, and therefore we question whether or not it has our own interests at stake, is a question of trust. Ultimately, always a question of trust. Do you trust the people who are building the machines with which you partake? Right? This is a question. Do I trust my own machine? I've had to ask this question like pretty deeply. In fact, having an autoimmune condition. Right? Do you trust your own body? How do you feel about material reality in general? All right. So,
that's a lot there, Tyler.
Sorry. Yeah. I did. And in fact, let me. I'll be.
He throws all that out and then leaves.
Oh no. Oh.
Okay,
that was good though. I had a whole bunch of thoughts that I would have liked to ask him. I would like to ask him what he thinks.
We do want to drag you in, Joseph, just so you know.
he's busy.
I know.
Yeah, he's busy with important matters.
Okay.
Well, about this point here, my question is, what I would say is it can't absorb my desires because it has no interest in, it has no ability to be empathic How can it absorb my desires if machines, they would have to be empathic, which would make them conscious, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the thing that you're interacting with traditionally in what we call a machine learning algorithm or program is it's pre-trained. So like in the case of like GPT, this is a pre-trained transformer. So the structure of the thing, like its identity, what it looks like, is made up of structures chosen by other human beings intelligently by their own interests, like what they wanted it to form itself out of. They chose the algorithms and also the data that they fed it with. And then they cultivate the output so that they feed back into it only that which they wish. That's how we've actually arrived at the let's call it the present most impressive parlor trick available, which is Chat GPT. So there's and so if you think about it, like the interface with that machine is a browser, right? It's like for most people, they log into a browser, and the thing that is behind it is this behemoth. I mean, just try to imagine for a moment, like reaching through the portal of that single web page into the labyrinth of like interconnected electrical fields and energetic effects and attentions of human beings and all of that insanity that's all going on. Why? Because in the hearts of man, they hope to create the ultimate answer to all their problems, right? Like,
yeah, the totalizing system.
Yeah, and there's this beautiful, there's this well, it's the positive polar ultimate absolute of the desire for order, right? And if you follow that road without the opposing balancing force, what you wind up with is the totalizing system, because what you're doing is you're concentrating the structure of the whole into the single thing, right? That it's because you're distributing. So for instance, whoever plugs into Chat GPT and then is transformed by it, the transformer, is then taking on the characteristics of those who have created its structure to perform a certain way.
Okay,
right? It's
so
making more of the world in its own image.
I'm gonna just hijack this a little bit because I don't want to get bogged down in the definition or the workings, because we want to talk about escape, subversion, or conquest, right? Like that's kind of like how do you manage living with this is the question, I guess. How shall we then live? As Francis Schaeffer so deftly put it once.
Yeah.
But Nate, you just threw a bunch of stuff in here. Do you want to talk about something specifically here?
It's just it was what I thought of. It's a passage from Meditations on the Tarot that I thought of when me was talking about the autism. So it's kind of like just there for posterity. I don't want to read the whole quote, but the gist of what Tomberg is saying there is that the automatic things have nothing to do with freedom.
Okay.
That the automatic things are done, and he gives examples. It's like he says that it's only the functioning of the human machine when a rich man declares himself an anti-communist and a poor man declares himself pro-communist. But it is a miracle to say, and that is to say, an act of freedom, when a rich man abandons his possessions and embraces poverty, as did St. Anthony the Great, and also many other saints. He also gives the example of St. Francis. So the point is like, it is in doing that which is not automatic and not according to nature that both freedom and miraculous are found.
Okay. So this is interesting to me because I was talking about this briefly in the box about Viktor Frankl and the idea of being truly free in a concentration camp, right? Which is actually right in the belly of the beast, actually, if you think about it. Like when you're talking about a machine, that was actually right there in the belly of that machine. And so this, I think that
can I just reinforce that really quick, because that's actually like one of like Elul's primary examples. When he's talking about technique, is like he says that like the Holocaust happened because of technique. Because if you look at the people who were actually like doing the Holocaust, who performing the acts that were involved in the Holocaust, they were all just focused on doing their job. They had been reduced to technicians, and the whole evil, awful machinery of the Third Reich just kind of ran under its own momentum.
Okay,
this
but let's
right here, War Against the Weak by Edwin Black. This is proof of the mechanistic backings of companies like IBM that allowed for cataloging of human beings and tracking of human beings. Now, of course, back in the day, they had to, punch things out and, print them off, and people had to have cards, right? Now it's even easier. Anyway, I just wanted to say that.
But let's contrast that with other, let's say, seemingly mechanistic functions, which are, what's a good word? Salutative. You like surgery, right? Like a team of people operating in precise fashion to restore someone to health. What would we say is the distinction between these automated processes? I would point it back to the origin. Like, what's the generator? What's its intention of that automated process? In the one, the intention is to heal, right? It's to restore to whole.
Yeah,
and in the other, you're extending the will of the Führer out into Nazi Germany, right?
Yeah, it's about intention.
Yeah. And so what you're meeting when you meet Nazi, then the Nazi Reich movement is that, well, so it's not that we can completely isolate all of the causality within Hitler, of course, right? What he's doing is he's capitalizing on a kind of distributed field of discontent, which is a whole bunch of people questioning the state of reality, right? And in that field of like questioning the state of reality, like they're wondering like why are the German people oppressed? Why us? Why me? Right? It's always what it comes to. Why me? Why me? And the answer to that and how we respond to that is like all the difference in the world in our religion. So I would say the answer to your question, Sherry, or Nate's framing for this whole thing, is that all three of those strategies are going to be employed. And just as it should be, you'll have the freedom to choose which route you want to take based on your desire, in a sense. If you can see it, what it seems like to me is if it's shown to you, that is, if you see the vision of the possibility of a different path within you.
Right. And that that's why I think that's what Viktor Frankl's getting at, because his whole shtick is attitude, right?
Yeah.
And so it's about your intention. Your attitude within yourself is what makes you truly free. Like he had to answer the question, why shouldn't I commit suicide to people who were living in a concentration camp? Why shouldn't I throw myself against the electric fence? Right.
Yeah.
And there is a world in which you can be truly free. There's another example from the Gulag Archipelago. I think it's from there. I don't know if we talked about this, Jess, or not, but there was a guy who, when he arrived, was very weak and very sick, and people were always stealing each other's food. And he decided that, and because he was weak and sick, they took his food easily, and he decided he wasn't going to fight back. And so he started actually allowing them to take his food, something like this. I'm not getting the story entirely right, but And then he actually gave them his food. He started giving them his food. And the amazing thing about this is that he actually got stronger and healthier. And most people had a very short lifespan within the gulag. But he lived long and healthy and strong, and he hardly had any food. And I remember telling whoever I was talking to about this recently, said something like, "Man does not live by bread alone." Maybe it was Luke, actually. Can't remember who it was. And this is this idea of attitude and intention, right? That makes you truly free, I think. So yeah, but to get back to the quest, is this an either or? Like, do we escape or subvert or conquest, or is this a both and? Do we do all three of those things? Like, how do we? Because every time I get in my car, I'm part of the machine. Every time I go to the grocery store, I'm part of the machine, right? Every time I go to my bank, and it's going to get even worse on that end. So, like, how do we negotiate this? I'm really curious. Like,
do you mind if I complicate this a little bit more, even?
Sure.
Because when we were talking about the surgeon, it made me think of like one of Alul's more challenging points when he was talking about technique. So this is a very short exchange here. So okay. So Alul says, one of my best friends. This is actually Alul speaking. One of my best friends was a very competent surgeon. During a discussion in which he participated about the problems of technology and progress, someone said to him, "You as a surgeon surely know everything about the progress in surgery." He gave a humorous reply, as always. "I'm certainly aware of the progress in the medical field, but just ask yourself the following question. Currently, we carry out heart transplants, liver transplant, and kidney transplant. But where do those kidneys, that heart, and those lungs come from, in fact? They must be healthy organs, not affected by an illness or the like. Moreover, they must be fresh. In fact, there is just one source: traffic accidents. So to carry out more operations, we need more traffic accidents. To make traffic safer, fewer of those wonderful if we make traffic safer, fewer of those wonderful operations will be carried out." Now that's the only part. Like that's
Yeah, but see, this
what
is
a tangled web we weave.
That's what I'm saying. It's like it's really complicated.
well, so when you try to encompass more and more of the whole web, your ability to describe how it relates to itself becomes less and less able. And you find yourself contradicting all sorts of things because you're trying to draw into a single expression,
Exactly.
like the width of this enormous set of relations.
Right.
And this is why we sin in this weird way, where we think that by capturing like a slice of the world in language and thereby make it amenable to a kind of grasping in conceptual space, we think that then in that small space, in that micro, the adjustments we make inside our minds then will actually manifest in the same way in the macro. And the only way that ever functions is by the projecting outwards, all that space, all the gap that's created by the expression of the small to the large is filled not by freedom and creativity, right? But by my own whim. And that is only established by rules, which is why you end up choking that space more and more with rules in order to manifest that singular sense of what the world should look like. And that process seems to be never ending in terms of the pattern that's playing out like this, in terms of the material realm. It's the playground with which we get to decide where we want to be, like what parts, and that where we want to be means
So
well, hold on, let me finish this point, Sherry, just real quick. At what point are we wanting to break out of the damnation where we are currently stuck in the great chain of being? Let me say it that way. Because that is the great pull that we are always experiencing, is the falling down or the rising up. That vertical motion, that sense of being connected with something which is drawing us up outwards, out of where we are now, the way in which we see things, and the limitations that we've ascribed to ourselves or that others have ascribed to us. That's the true sense of it. And the question is, have I settled into a place where I ultimately, in this state of being, as the choices I've made, am I actually satisfied? Do I no longer feel a pull upwards and outwards? Do I no longer engage in the practice of love, movement away from the things which ultimately I recognize intuitively in my own experience are harming me and the things around me? When I have settled, I'll know that I've followed my path. But until that point, it's always that question. And I don't think we'll be able to settle it here as a kind of consequence of group discussion, because each of us must, I will say this, like each of you personally,
Yeah.
I know of no one who's watching. I have no idea, but each of you personally, of course, there's some resonance with our being where I say I settle into a space with you and I feel at home, right? It's a feeling like that. It's like,
Well, this is what
whatever this is.
This is what I'm thinking about right now, Tyler, because you talked about this gap that we fill with laws, right? With rules.
Yep.
And I think it's because we're actually alienated from one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
We think that we don't see the connection that we have to each other because and this might sound really, really simple, but we need to make persons, we need to make children, we need to build families, we need to have community through the building of families to fill the gap so that the rules become understood rather than written down, right? Like, I think we talked about this once, Tyler, about the idea of taboo versus legislation,
Yep.
right? Where you have these social taboos, and these are the unwritten laws, right? Nobody can be dragged in front of a judge because they broke a taboo, but they feel the pain of social isolation if they do. So they don't, right? And otherwise it just becomes a he said, she said situation when you want to drag up things in front of a judge, right? Like, because look, it says right here, it's written down, these are the words he said or she said, right?
Yeah.
And so honestly, I think the only way, and I actually think, like, in regards to the title of this podcast, this is the way that you deal with the machine, is you build parallel societies. You have children, you build community, and you fill that gap with what is it? Knowing, connaître, being born with someone. That's what that means. Connaître, the French word to know someone is to be born with them. I mean, that denotes family and community, right? So anyway, those were my thoughts when you were talking.
Yeah.
About that gap.
Yeah. Well, that's this obsession in what I love that we've all just completely settled on calling it this corner or whatever. This obsession with dialogue, with speech, with conversation is recognizing this. I think it's the field of effect between us isn't established by some edict, but it's established by our continual agreement and conversation with each other, which is just the relating of energy to each other, how we feel, how we truly feel and see things. And hopefully a buyer, and this is the next part, this is the next hardest part, what it seems like, is the question of action. Right. So yeah, just grab whenever you want, because now you've been poked.
I know.
The question of action, right? Like what so when you've witnessed the way things are and you wish to be some other way, and you feel caught or connected in the way that you were describing before, Sherry, like in the machine, in a way that your own actions are then like pressed up against all these automated actions which feel unhealthy. Then what do you do? How is it that you respond? And that creating something new sentiment is what's taking place. And yeah, so how do we do that well? Right? How does the body form itself well within the womb such that it is not expelled? And that's the deep question, I think, that is truly being discussed here, at least when I take a step back and look at all of it.
Here's an interesting thing to think about. Matthias Desmet was in a conversation and was doing like a Q&A, and he talked about this. This is not my idea, and I think it's really interesting. So someone was talking about the fact that, when you think about this machine and this gargantuan, like of all of the world at the moment moving in certain direction, right? You get this sense that evolution is going badly awry. You're just like, oh my God, stop.
No, if Thomberg is right, it's had like evolution. The horizontal principle of evolution is headed toward its natural conclusion, which is to build a body for Antichrist.
Well, so this is the interesting part of Desmet's answer, was that he flipped it on its head. He said, what if those who don't participate are the truly evolving ones, right? Because they get cast out into the wild, so to speak, right? Excuse me. And they learn to, I don't know exactly how he put it, but, they learn to commune with one another. They build families. They have these, they cooperate properly with each other. And perhaps that is the course of evolution, right? This smaller group, because they're the ones who will survive, because the totalizing system eats its own, right? Like, this is the thing. It actually devours itself, is what it does. And so what's gonna survive out of that is this other group, right? Who has actually learned to love, I would just put it simply. And maybe that's the course of evolution, right?
It makes me think of the exception. Machines don't know how to deal with the exception. A totalizing system doesn't know how to deal with an exception. And so this has been the whole problem with self-driving cars and any sort of automated thing that people thought was going to be pretty simple to set up once we got enough computing power. That, like, we've had cars be able to drive on like a closed course, flat track. They can navigate fine. They can do that all day. But it's having the car go down the street and know what to do when a ball bounces out between two cars out in front of it. Like, that's the exception. Like that, and it's always those types of things. And so like even like English common law has like our legal system has a plan for this. So we have our like laws that are all written down that everyone has to obey, but then we still have to deal with exceptions. So what do we do? How do we deal with the exceptions to this? We actually have a person called a judge that makes a judgment, and then that can be appealed and other judges weigh in, and the system kind of gets built up through that. But you always have to deal with an exception, and this is even not to bring the book of Job into it, but Job is the exception, and his friends have the mechanized totalizing system worldview, and they don't know how to deal with it, and people always find themselves in people excel in spanning that gap, in being mediators between the spots. And it's like if a machine runs into an exception, it breaks, it stalls, it stops, whatever. But if a person's there to get it over that gap, it can keep running. And like, we need our systems or whatever, but we also need people. You call a company to fix a problem, and you get stuck in their automated phone system, and you're like, I just need a person because they don't have a button for my problem. and you know, you push a button and a person answers. They're like, well, I got to send you to somewhere else, and they send you back to the automated system, and you can get stuck in these loops without like a person there to like
Mediate.
to make a decision and get you out of that loop. It's like that Tom Hanks movie with the guy who gets stuck in the airport because he has a passport for a country that doesn't exist anymore. On his flight over, the country got overthrown.
The terminal.
The terminal.
Yeah.
And so he gets stuck in the airport. He gets stuck in this spot of endless transition where there's no home and there's no one there to actually make a decision.
Wow.
To span that gap, because the law says this, but he's the exception. He's like, and that's the exception always breaks the system.
Well,
breaks
okay.
the system.
Yeah, but it's okay. All right. Yeah. Okay, but this he's in the terminal and he can just walk out the door. Why doesn't he just walk out the door?
I forget that part.
Why aren't you breaking any laws right now? Are you breaking any laws right now?
I don't know. You don't
He doesn't want to break the law.
Don't confess.
I haven't seen the movie.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm breaking a law right now or two. But there's something about the question of it, and because I want to poke this part of what you just said, because it's partly true, but it's on the other side of it. I think when we ask to speak with a person, what we're saying is, I hope that I'm going to talk with something that is willing to change based on what I say, right? It's willing to hear me and do something about what I need. But this thing that I'm talking to can't do it.
I have a real life example of that. So during the pandemic, Starbucks closed, right? And the drive-through was always open, but for some reason this one day it wasn't open, and I had to go in, and you could order ahead with your phone. And you could go in, they had a little table set up in front where you could pick up your order, right? But obviously you pay for everything over the phone. So you just go in and grab it. I don't have a phone. And so I went in because I saw that there were people in there and I thought it was open. And I walked in and they were all, don't come in, you know, unless you have a mobile order. And I said, I don't have a phone. And they were, and they immediately just didn't know what to do, right? And I'm standing in the coffee shop where they're making coffee, right? And so, and I could see their minds go completely blank because they're so caught up in this system, right? So
yeah, that's the entire. That's it.
Yeah, and so I said to her, I said, okay, hang on. I said, look at me. And because her eyes were darting all over the room, right? And I said, I'm here and you're here and I have money and you have coffee. Could you make me one and I'll give you the money? And I just had to walk. It's literally what I did. Okay.
So Sherry, from your little example, you can see why a little points toward awareness.
Yeah.
Awareness of technique as the key to like overcoming being trapped into that loop of automation, you know, like
which is why the guy didn't leave the terminal. It's the same thing. It's the same reason the guy didn't leave the terminal.
Okay, hold on. But all right, so we all have children.
I just want to say one more thing. If we're gonna, I want to use this terminal as a metaphor.
Yes, Luke.
Like for the entire situation, right? Let's just say that the entire global situation is the terminal. So I want to talk about that because that relates to our theme. Is like, what is the strategy? It's like, okay, you have the awareness of the fact that you're in the terminal.
Oh.
And and I'm very interested in the reason to not leave, because I would say that leaving is immoral because everyone else is still stuck in the terminal.
Ooh.
Okay. No. Okay, well, so I would see the metaphor a little bit differently there in terms of motivational states, but I don't because I don't think that matters. Yeah, that's not the point to argue about. But that framing, so I agree with you first of all, right? Like all of the interesting work to be done is in the middle. Let's call it, right. That's why we left the garden. That's why we're all participating in this, because in the stress of the plane of existence, where not everything is working out perfectly, that is, the state of being is, in fact, as we would describe it, fallen. Both I and you and all of us are continually doing things that we're all perpetually dissatisfied with. In that state, what do you do in response to it? And that question that you're asking is, well, so previously we would say, I do what my father does. Why aren't you doing what your father did? Why aren't all these people doing what their father did? Now, I didn't have a father for the first 5 years of my life. My modern beginning was fatherless. So my sense of the father was by nature ethereal. What I turned to when I thought of authority first initially was love, right? Like the generative function of like why it is I even came into being was the love of my mother, held in her arms every time I got hurt. It soothed me, like, oh, with the world isn't how I want it to be. Love is why I return again back to the fact that I have to accept it's not how I wish it to be, right? Now, we do that writ large over and over again, and we give all the power to the answer of that question to the forceful side of the authoritarian side, where we by force and by law, by jurisprudence, define the boundaries, the clear edges of the great state of culture that we all inhabit. This is where we start to feel this oppressiveness. All right, it's the oppressiveness of, hey, Jacob's here, great representation. It's the oppressiveness of 613 laws. Now, that oppressiveness is fascinating because it produces a certain kind of mind.
Yeah.
Right? When you try to pay attention to all those very special nuances and exceptions, by the way. My favorite thing about Jewish law is the exceptions. It's fascinating. Like the Erev. Oh, I love these little games that get played forever, back and forth, right? It's a fun little game with God that we're always
What's
playing.
What's the example?
Oh, the
I'm
Erev.
not familiar with it.
Maybe Jacob, tell us about the Erev.
So the Eruv.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I'm horrible at pronunciation. That's my fault. Yeah,
perfectly fine. It is. So let's put it this way: Comedy Central decided to do on, I think it was the Colbert Show or the Daily Show decided to do a whole segment on it because it's easy and fun to make fun of, I actually think that's part of the beauty of it. So when I was on a Muslim channel, one of the Muslims said, "You don't believe in the same God we do because you believe God gets tired, and that's why you have the Sabbath." I told him, "No, we actually do not believe that God gets tired, and that is not why we have the Sabbath." And when I was more observant of the Sabbath, I would, for example, end up walking several hours because I would not get into a car and drive. And so the actual laws of the Sabbath have to do with creative work. And one of the ways of creative work is transferring, which means moving things from one domain to the other. And there is a lot of symbolism involved in that. But it means that while it's perfectly fine if I move furniture within my home on the Sabbath, if I walk out the door with a toothpick in my pocket, that is considered transferring, and that would be a violation of the Sabbath. And one of the beautiful things about an Eruv, and actually an Eruv is mentioned in the New Testament, because they talk about the amount you can walk in the Sabbath, is that what the community does is they build a boundary around the community, and eruv means to mix, and they create a community in which we share. So my neighbor and I share the public spaces together, so that there's no longer a so Nate had enabled guest streaming, so we are streaming to my channel and the Randoms United channel.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
And so the community creates an eruv, creates a mixing of domains, so that when I walk from my house to my neighbor's house, there's no carrying involved. And it appears to be a legal fiction, and a lot of people don't like that legal fiction, but it's actually, I think it's what points away from the materiality into the spiritual nature of the ideal. And we're not there. All that's changing is spiritual, right? It's an agreement that we've made. And usually, I mean, in a lot of places here in Los Angeles, we use the freeways, so it's more tangible. But in Manhattan, for example, there's a string around the around the island, which designates those boundaries. And a lot of people will turn to the strings and they're like, how does that string change whether or not, when you walk to your neighbor's house and you bring something with you, that's actually changing something? But I mean, this is the spiritual nature. There's a whole tractate of the Talmud called Eruvin, which is on this idea of how you create a community with that symbolic string, right? Like, and people make fun of it all the time. And I understand that. But I think it's real.
Let me assert, Jacob. I like fully acknowledge your justified defense of the beauty of this process, and that's what I was pointing to. Not to make fun of it, but to point to the process of recognizing that when a boundary is drawn, the question is, why was the boundary drawn? It's Chesterton fence. Right. And if you have access to the spirit of the law, that allows you to adjust where the boundary actually is. Right. When you have under consideration, let's say, like the example you use of the toothpick in the pocket, when you have in consideration the day-to-day pragmatic life of the people living the religion, then it allows you to alter the shape of the law. So I think that having to do that is part of the process of learning the value of defining ultimately what it becomes is two worlds. And this is the true dualism that we always are faced with, by the way.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Tyler.
Yeah, because the question of how we perceive rules and their value and whether or not we're the ones generating them is a really, really deep question. What rules do I give to my children and how do I enforce them? And especially for the rules which they cannot even begin to possibly understand why they're important, right? Which is why people make fun of something like the Eruv, because they don't understand the importance of what it's doing in the community. How do you convey that? How do you actually convey that to someone to the point that they're going to follow it? And I think what we're noticing very often is we're beginning to define between each other whether or not we want to be neighbors with each other based on how we see our relation to rules.
This goes back to me quoting on Paul's channel, "For whom the bell tolls." I honestly think part of the problem is this, and the Catholic Church most beautifully has been standing against, and the popes have been standing against this concept of disposable people, and there are no disposable people.
Amen.
I might have missed something. Where did disposable people
And
come from?
that's precisely why in the analogy that we were using earlier of the terminal, that I said that the strategy of merely escaping the terminal is immoral, because as Jacob says, there are no disposable people, and the act of escaping the terminal is leaving others behind.
Okay, but I wanted to address that question that you had, Nate, because one of the points that, and again, I'm going to quote Desmet because I really like what he says about all this. He talks about when people are under the spell of this totalizing system. So that's what we're talking about. The terminal, let's say, okay, is this totalizing system. He calls it a hypnosis. Okay, so they're under a hypnosis, and the only thing that wakes them up from the hypnosis, and that I think I illustrated that with my little coffee example in the Starbucks, right, is voice, like resonance. You have to say something, right, to break the spell. It's also voice that hypnotizes, which is really interesting. And so when it comes to the totalizing system, what Desmet recommends is that, and these are his words, you find a good place to hunker down and you speak the truth in love. And that's the only way that you might not survive it physically, right? Like you might not have the benefit of actually making it through, but at some point it'll peter out, because totalizing systems don't last. Actually, they're one of the shortest lived systems out there. So
I gotta say, we keep doing it over and over. There'll just be another one on the horizon. We just keep doing it over and over and over and over again.
Well, not in the way
almost all we
modernity is
do.
doing. It's not the same the way that modernity is doing it.
Wait, can I catch him real quick there?
Yeah.
What you're doing, Nate, there is you're moving more towards occupying a position or a stance where you can say in the future, in perpetuity, how do we solve this problem?
That's why I'm having the discussion. Yeah.
Well, and okay, so that is partaking in essence of the question of how do I in this moment resolve all things?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's totalizing.
Yeah, that's actually totalizing.
Even conceptually, like even to try to move into that space, the best we can do is deal with as close to the now as we possibly can. And so what you're pointing to is real. So I think another way we could talk about this is the difference between prescriptivist and descriptivist in terms of language, how we should speak about things, right? Do I just define like the actual curve of existence that I belong to? So you and I belong to this part of this cycle right now on this earth, localized to this generation, confronted by this part of the cycle. Yes, it will collapse again, perhaps. We don't know if there is some other further ascendancy or octave in these things that we can't describe properly in the language we have access to now. But we don't even need to assume that.
We're never going to get there if we're not even trying to talk about it, though. If there is how could we even possibly get to some higher ascendancy or octave if we're not even willing to have the discussion?
No, how do we get there right now would be my question.
I mean, while I think I basically agree with Nate, let me reframe it. I think the Abrahamic faith is that there is an arc of history, that we know that God knows, in fact, that we will arrive on that mountain. And the faith is that the Logos is that which binds us. The Word of God is that which binds us and allows us to step forward towards that inevitable end. So it's not a question of whether we will get there. We will, in fact, get there. And there is an irrational faith that we will, in fact, get there. And there is, I would say, an equivalently irrational faith that it is the Logos, that it is speaking truth, which will, in fact, move us there.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I entirely agree. And I would say that I've said this before, like the question that I would say that our Jewish friends need to keep asking Christians is, where's the kingdom? Because that is our shared telos. And I would also say that when Christians get overly concerned with immanentizing the eschaton, they are forgetting the fact that the end of the story is the union of heaven and earth. And we probably have something to do in that process. And that it's not all just God, that we need to cooperate with God in whatever is going to happen. Well, and not just wait around for rescue.
Yeah, I mean, what I somewhat famously have been telling Paul Vanderklay is, what I wonder about the Christians is the word Christ means Messiah, and where's the messianism in Christianity? And why are Christians constantly asking for Jesus to take the wheel when and I mean, Paul sent me a meme he saw. He had like somebody driving a car and the wheel goes off and he says, Jesus, not that wheel.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's actually perfect, because I'm going to step on a lot of toes here and I won't poke it too hard, but I think this is actually what it became. What happened when the Holy Roman Empire? So what happened when the Roman Empire needed to deal with Christianity, and when that merged, what became part of the traditional notion of Christianity was the idea of a kind of Lord, which sat in a place that told you what to do. And that ingrains within you a culture of seeking that individual or that structure associated with the individual, the Lord above you, or whatever that is, in order to solve your problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that does produce something. That produces a cultural body. But what we're saying here in this conversation is that cultural body is not what you each want to participate with.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the style of body that you wish to partake of. Right.
Well,
so what you're saying is what it seems like to me is that you wish to be neighbors, but existing in a place where you are not subject to the machines built by someone else, but you are in fact participating with the source of how the proper rules are engaged for those who are in fact choosing to partake in that way. And I think you find this at the very end of the New Testament. The very end of the story of Christ. If you love me, feed my sheep. So that there will always be children in the world if you have this ever cyclical invitation towards new being. How do you relate to that new being? How do you convey to it this fundamental structure of reality such that it will one day mature and begin to give rules to itself again? Okay, and that's the question of birthing the real Christ versus building and construct the Antichrist, I think.
Yes.
So, okay, there's two different things you've brought up, and I'll try to address each of them, and you guys can decide which way you want to go, but very briefly. There's one is the problem of the state and the church becoming one in the Holy Roman Emperor and Constantine and everything that went down there. And that's something I am constantly railing about, that people wonder, why do I need to constantly talk about Zionism as a heresy, right? Because I need to talk about Zionism constantly as a heresy. And then there's the question of what you're saying about the cyclical hope, right? And that cyclical hope was something I was very surprised about when Pageau and Paul Vanderklay would talk about the church needs to die and be resurrected, and how their churches are constantly dying to be resurrected, right? And I think that is one of the fundamental differences between Christianity and Judaism, is that Christianity is always talking about this now and not yet, of Jesus having come and having been resurrected, yet needing to die again and a second coming, where I think that is a fundamental problem and mistake from my point of view, in that, no, you have to realize the Messiah has not come. That is something in the future that we are working towards. And so these are two very different things that you brought up, and we can take it wherever you want, but they're very different things.
Jacob, let me. And I've said this to Hezi like this, so let's see what you have to say about this. And I heard Zevi Slavine saying something very similar to this, which was kind of mind-boggling to me, because I'm the only other person I've heard say this. But I have for most of my life, I have conceived what Christians refer to as the parousia, as the presencing of Christ, as what as the first coming of the Messiah for Jews. And I see Israel and the church both continuing in the world with distinct missions for a reason. And I think that Jesus isn't that final Messiah. Jesus is not that for Jews, but he is for us as Gentiles. And what the final parousia will be it'll be a shift in consciousness. It won't be the presencing of Christ. Will be the arrival of Christ in the consciousness of all.
So
that is what seeing him in that's what seeing him in the clouds means. The clouds will be parted, and the ability to presence Christ will occur in the world. This is what Barfield is essentially talking about in his idea of final participation too.
Have you been listening to my discussions with Father Stephen Dion?
I have not had a chance to, but I will.
Okay. So an important part of that discussion is the fact that Christianity for the past 50 years, certainly, but mostly for the past 20 years, has been dealing with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what the Dead Sea Scrolls have made perfectly clear, and after the Holocaust made very enticing to Christians, has been this idea that the Jews during the time of Jesus were not looking for a Messiah. They were looking for several Messiahs. And Christianity has, at least to some extent, started trying to grapple with that. But I have to say that this is not the Christianity that existed for thousands of years, where the Jews, and I have to say, I mean, I believe it's in the Gospel of Matthew and or John and in the letters of Paul, where it talks about the Jews did not recognize the Messiah who came. And so, I mean, I prefer these stories I'm hearing from Christians now to what has been heard from Christians for thousands of years. At the same time, I can't truthfully say you're being honest to the Christian tradition when you say that somehow it's okay for Jews not to look at Jesus as the one Messiah, as the totalizing force that the book of Hebrews portrays him to be.
Can I just say something, and you guys can continue this if you want to after I say this, but
Sure, go for it.
I don't want to get stuck in the disagreement because both you and Jacob agreed that for you there's an arc, right? For you and Jacob, there's an end to history, right? To this machine, because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, because Elul says that technique begins with the fall. So I mean, it's not like there's never been a time when it hasn't been with us.
Right. So the question, to bring it back around again, because you know we're all such great conversationalists that we could go on forever. How do we deal with it, people? Do we run away from the machine? Do we subvert the machine? Do we conquer the machine? Do we do all three things? I think, I'm going to say this, I think that some people escape. I think some people subvert. And I think some people conquer. Because not all parts of the body are the feet or the hand, right? We all have different functions. And so anyway, that's what.
So since Jacob's here, I'll suggest something that was none of those options. Let's suggest this as a possibility. No, because Jacob's presence has made me think of another option that is none of the above. Because essentially, like technique or the machine, is connected with our evil inclination, right? So I say with subversion as the closest, but I think transformation is a better word than subversion. So we need to cooperate with God so that our evil inclination is transformed.
Well, that's the option that we haven't talked about, is the redemption.
Right. This is the option that we haven't talked about.
Of the machine. Can the machine be redeemed?
Well, it ends with the New Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
The story, that's how the story ends. So I would say that points toward the possibility of the redemption and transformation of the machine, which is not an option I put on the table initially, but Jacob's presence here made me think that that's something I overlooked.
Tyler?
Jess isn't talking very much.
I'm waiting to shoehorn Job in here somewhere.
Go ahead.
He just did. Hallelujah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I like the idea of staying in the terminal. Like I think you stay in it, and even like the idea that we're gonna resist or be the exception or whatever. More than likely, we're just gonna be a part of it.
We already are. We
already are. I just traveled internationally, and at one of the places in the airport, we were going through getting our passports checked and stuff. Like, you put your passport in the thing, it scans the barcode, and they literally just scan your face. Like, you face the camera, they scan your face, and then the green light shows there's no person there to check you, and you pass through the thing. For one of my flights, I had a boarding pass. They didn't even scan the boarding pass. Literally, I just looked at a camera. It scanned my face and was like, okay. So anyway, but the system has to. I mean, for me, it all comes down to the exception. The exception will change the system if they don't.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at, Jess.
And so it takes a person to stick it out. Like, as far as like Job, like, he's tempted to. His wife says to him, "Curse God and die," and he said, and Job refuses, and he basically stays in the system, and he says, "I'm going to demand justice," and that was the right thing to do, and so. And because of what Job does, there's real transformation in the world, and this. So that's kind of how I see it.
Do you think, though? Here's the question, Jess. Like, I just want to understand this properly. I don't want to misunderstand you. So, are you saying that that what Job is doing? Like, I get this image of this closed world of the serpent, right? And Job exits that closed world of the serpent.
He's thrown.
Right. And so that back to our terminal thing and Nate's question about the morality of leaving the terminal, right? Is that actually leaving people behind, or is that showing
But
them
Job does. But Job is
way out?
Job is the ultimate example of the hanged man, though, who is between, who is caught between heaven and earth.
Yeah, because he sees the way out. He actually sees it.
But he remains in between. He's the hanged man. He doesn't escape.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, because I have friends who became atheists for ethical reasons, for moral reasons that when they explained it to me made sense to me, and I was like, yeah, that's an ethical, because they grew up in evangelical Christianity and saw abuses or were traumatized somehow or whatever, but they don't stay in it. They eject, and they're like, God doesn't exist. And for me, that's like leaving the terminal. And
oh, interesting. I don't see it that way at all.
Well, okay, so let's add more.
To me, that's just like let's just give in to the terminal, because to me, there's like a material, like the metaphor of the terminal that we're using is closely
it's terminals nested inside
materialism.
It's terminals all the way down, exactly. But we have to flesh it out a little bit more, because why did he stay? The question of why he stayed in the terminal is, I think, is of important. So initially, it was a bureaucratic failure. So it was strictly the rules that said you can't go through that door, and he said, okay, well, I don't want to break the rules, so I'll wait. At some point, though, he gets really frustrated, right? But there's something that diverted him from getting so frustrated that he just ran through the doors to freedom. And what was that? Do you remember? He fell in love. Was it Catherine Zeta-Jones? The stewardess that kept coming back, and he would wait for her, and he built that fountain for her that the workers were supposed to build that they never did. So he picked up the undone things in the world and made something beautiful with it, because he was in love with the rare opportunity to find something in that hellish bureaucratic nightmare that he loved, and it was worth that. And so that's where you have to start, I think, is you have to ask people, what do you love? Like, what do you really love? And what are you doing that nourishes that love? Well, and another question that a lot of people in this space, I think, particularly need to hear, and especially ones that don't participate in these conversations but just listen, is how are you being loved? And what do you need to be loved? Because I think there's a whole lot of people in this world that aren't feeling it. And it's up to us to share what we feel with each other, else it rots.
Amen. Amen, Tyler.
Amen. I would also say that, like, love is the thing that binds heaven and earth properly, right?
Well, let's get more pragmatic,
and let's go back to your discussion of the law. I would say that the law isn't, like, for someone who's a faithful Jew, the law is an act of love. Performing those things is an act of love. It's a binding of heaven and earth. It's not done because it's the law. It's done because it's for God. It's cooperation with God, and some of those things that, like, maybe from a Christian point of view seem like, overly, like, materialistic or silly, what they are actually, another way of looking at them is like constant reminders of God's presence.
Yes.
In everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that the diversity which exists, and I'm just going to throw this as a framing that maybe we can try to fill with the spirit of the conversation with regards to what we do, of the representations of those spirits, even within this conversation, is this. the persistent diversity of life, of being that we see in this world, from like tree to mammal, inclusive of the diversity of religions. In particular, we could point to like 3 major ones that we typically do, but there's minor variations on a theme. Why do those persist? Why is it that like billions of people will carry it forward? It can't be that they don't find value in it. And so each of us, in the same way that Jacob was criticizing like the spirit of Christianity earlier, because he's perceiving it on the outside, so he's seeing something about it on the outside that if we listen to, perhaps, is telling us something about, if we find ourselves on the inside of that thing, what it is that we might be doing to become a better version, to keep growing in truth and light, such that when we relate to the various cultural organs which have persisted because of their value, whatever that value may be, from the outside, sometimes impossible to glean. If we can figure out how to bring those things together in harmony without requiring that they either be destroyed or changed to be like us, but rather we find some greater common denominator or numerator, or both, the line between, right? That which ultimately binds together. And I think if there's something that can come from this conversation about what we do, it's born of that. It's sharing with each other the perspectives that we see from the places that we find ourselves within, and truly trying to hear from each other how it is we can be better versions within the context of that seeing.
Yeah, and you don't have to understand everything to do that, because you can just do what Jacob was talking about, which is you have the faith that all things work together for
good.
God makes everything work together for the good.
Yeah.
And like, so you don't have to like try to figure it out. That's the thing is like, so often we're trying to figure it out, and you're like, we're trying to analyze everything and make decisions based on what we know, and
to build a better machine, to replace one machine with another
Right.
machine, as opposed to what I would say is, and I think where we're landing here, I think there is significant overlap, is that it seems like we could posit something as the best solution is something like forming communities of love.
See,
Yeah.
okay, this is what I want to let Guy and Ken speak, but one of the things I've noticed has become the worst idol today is love.
Now, see, I would say, Jacob, that
love has become an idol. You can say God is love. You cannot say love is God.
It's interesting.
Well, it's easy to counterfeit. We've gotten very good at counterfeiting things. And this is when we talk about the Antichrist. We talk about this persistent quality of mimicry, which is a superficial counterfeit, right? And that is always present.
I don't think that's it, because I think if once you turn even true love into God, right? This is the thing. The people who and it's a huge problem, and part of the reason that the churches are dying are this kumbaya, this of course God loves you as you are.
But that's a counterfeit. Isn't that a counterfeit? Because that's what you're complaining about, this kumbaya. You're implying in that exaggerated speech that it's not really there, right?
Well, no, I actually think it really is. People.
So then, hold on. Well, let's agree on that then, Jacob. Let's agree. Come on. That is a counterfeit of love, and you're recognizing it as such.
I don't think the problem is that the love is counterfeit. I think the problem is that love is taking up the top of the hierarchy where God belongs. And
yeah, I would say the alternative. I would say, Jacob, here's what happens. What happens, Jacob, when we don't. Okay. So I think I have all kinds. Obviously, I'm going to have all kinds of problems with this. First of all, I think love simply is the essence of God. I'm not afraid to make that cataphatic statement, and my Orthodox friends can freak out about it all they want. Like that. Love simply is the essence of God. That is the way that reality unfolds itself is love, and that the alternative to love at the top of the hierarchy is power. at the top of the hierarchy, and power is the root of all idolatry.
No,
So it's
no,
actually
no,
impossible. It's actually impossible to make love an idol.
Okay.
But
I wanna
every
go back to the
single
Old Testament
symbol
on
can
you
be
now.
traced to power.
Nate, if I might, I want to go back to the Old Testament on you. Sorry, Jacob, to take your testament, so to speak, but God is righteousness and justice. Those are the two key framing bits of him. And yes, there is a lot of it in that, and he loves us, but righteousness and justice are far more important. I just had a friend who has just left his wife of multiple years because he loves somebody else. And he's, a good Christian, so to speak.
You keep
what he's
acting
done
as
is
you
he's
keep
made-
using a false definition of love and saying that's what the people who are saying that love is that love is the top of the hierarchy. Like
So wait, hold on.
It's an absolute straw man.
We're going to get stuck on the definition of love, you guys.
Wait, hold on.
I'm just warning you.
So this is the problem is it's the word itself. It's the way that we each interpret it. Once it's so overloaded, I think that if that point is absolutely true about what Jacob's pointing to, it's so overloaded we can't point to it and say it is synonymous with, because we lose sight of, each of us, in its overloadedness of what it is we're actually pointing to.
The greatness of God is his ineffability.
Well,
are we talking now? Wait, I want to ask Jacob this specifically. Are we now talking about the God of our own understanding, Jacob? Because
that's a much better way of talking about God. What
if the God of Tyler's understanding or Nate's understanding is love, right? And the God of Guy's understanding is righteousness and justice. And
Christ's summary of the law wouldn't even work unless love was at the top of the hierarchy.
Hold on. So let's stick with the marriage one, because that's certainly poignant. I'm from a failed marriage. Okay, I'm divorced, and I could go into the specifics of it, but certainly not in a public setting like this. I tend to overshare anyways. I didn't want that. I didn't desire that separation, but we have no control over some things, and who and what people are attracted to and what they love in the world, we can't control either. We can try. But what we're really saying is, or what I was saying in my marriage, was I hold outside of either of us, myself or my spouse, the sanctity of this idea of unity. And that is the bond of marriage. And I was willing to be beholden to that. Now that in its framing and in its structure, that which I was pressed up against by virtue of the pragmatism of living daily with an individual that I didn't agree with, that was the shape of the God that I was using to manifest that structure. And it's all that I knew in that space. And the degree to which I was willing to be pressed up against that and be shaped by it was how I began to define myself. And she thought differently, and she loved differently. And what I had to do was be okay with that. And what I had to do was recognize that we weren't neighbors, that perhaps she was a liver cell and she needed to move to another place in the body where she was in fact called to be. And that's something that I can't decide for her or for my relationship with regards to how I control what the world looks like. But it's something I have to deeply wrestle with every day as an invitational structure towards all the people that I relate with. Why do we continue our relationships at all? What's the point of it? It's the activities that we have between us, the way that we share our energy. Is my output nourishing to you or harmful? Is your output nourishing to me or harmful? And by that distinction, we begin to define, am I a nephrotic, right? Am I a kidney cell? Or am I a liver cell? Because if you put those two together, they'll kill each other. But if you don't have both, you don't have a body. And so what we've done is we've discovered all together in this conversational layer, all at once, all in these final days, the whole of the body. And we have representations from it. And none of us are perfect in our representations. But I know, and I desire, and I'm participating in the work necessary for us to discover together through dialogue how it is that we might relate to each other despite our differences. And that the greater thing that binds us together, whatever it is we discover, That is the best we can do with our attempt to approach God, and that's unity. Now, if you want to sit on the other side of a fence and talk about justice, absolutely. That's where you feel called in creation. Go for it. Go for it. Perhaps that's where you need to be. Like those are the actions that you need to be partaking in the world. It's hard for us to know for each other if we don't speak
And I
well.
think that what I was going to say about my friend is that he said, "Oh, it's irresistible. I feel this way. I can't stop." And actually, I think it is resistible. I think that he had some choices he probably made a very easy choice way back when, and that was the wrong choice, and then compounded over a long period. But when we say, like Jacob was saying, that God is love, but love is not God, I think that is really important. That distinction is vital to understand that the totality of God is not love in itself and only itself. There are other things like justice and mercy and holiness that exist in Him that are actually vital components. I mean, it's not just love. Otherwise, there would be no eternal punishment, if you believe me, of course. There would be no, retributive act.
But okay,
You've
can
got
I
to
tell you
hold
how
those things in tension. If you don't hold them in tension, you just think
Yeah,
God
because
is
that's what
one
we need to
thing.
make sure is
You're
we need to
actually
make sure
demeaning
we
Him.
have retribution. God forbid we lose retribution.
There you go. Okay,
I
right
just-
there. Okay, hold on. So that's the question. This is how I think of it. Justice without love appended to it or imbued with it is vengeance or retribution. And so what it spawns is more of it. There is justice, but without love. So again, the superseding value, the thing that actually unifies and ties it, is always going to be this thing that we gesture towards, which is this question of that what is it that actually unifies our relations together? I have a rationality or any irrationality that I'm participating with that tells me I must do this, or I must tell someone else they must do this. Vengeance, yes, absolutely. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. And I think there's something about our conscious attempt to grasp a hold of this, which goes awry so quickly. We always seem to want to have our reach exceed our grasp. We can't help it.
I hope you guys won't mind me being a tiny bit of a Bible thumper, but I thought maybe a little bit of Bible might do us all some good. I hope you guys don't mind. Psalm 94. O Lord God, to whom vengeance belongs, O God, to whom vengeance belongs, shine forth. Rise up, O judge of the earth, render punishment to the proud. Lord, how long will the wicked triumph? They utter speech and speak insolent things. All the workers of iniquity boast in themselves. They break in pieces your people, O Lord, and afflict your heritage. They slay the widow and the stranger and murder the fatherless. Yet they say, the Lord does not see, nor does the God of Jacob understand. Understand, you senseless among the people, and you fools, when will you be wise? He who planted the ear, shall he not hear? He who formed the eye, shall he not see? He who instructs the nations, shall he not correct? He who teaches man knowledge. The Lord knows the thoughts of man, that they are futile. Blessed is the man whom you instruct, O Lord, and teach out of your law, that you may give him a rest from the days of adversity, until the pit is dug for the wicked. For the Lord will not cast off his people, nor will he forsake his inheritance. But judgment will return to righteousness, and all the upright in heart will follow it. Who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? Unless the Lord has been my help, my soul would so soon have settled in silence. If I say my foot slips, your mercy, O Lord, will hold me up. In the multitude of my anxieties within me, your comforts delight my soul. Shall the throne of iniquity, which devises evil by law, have fellowship with you? They gather together against the life of the righteous and condemn innocent blood. But the Lord has been my defense, and my God, the rock of my refuge. He has brought on them their own iniquity, and shall cut them off in their own wickedness. The Lord our God shall cut them off. And I'm sorry, but I think people who try to make love God are cutting parts of their Bible out, including parts of the New Testament, including the Gospels, out of their own Bibles.
Jacob, do you wish to enact vengeance on someone or something?
No.
Do you wish for us to?
No.
What are we talking about?
I'm talking about the Bible.
What are we talking about?
I am a Bible thumper, pure and simple.
What in the context of now, how we are now in our life now? What are we talking about? What
we're talking about people saying that love is God, and that's wrong. And it's so wrong that it causes all kinds of problems.
So I'd like to weigh in here a little bit. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
So one thought that I'm having, kind of just noticing this conversation go on, is there's something interesting that happens when we're talking about different levels of being. One thing that it sounds to me like is happening is Tyler and Nate are attempting to address a vision of God and love from the level of being a person in the being now that we are. And Jacob is attempting to salvage aspects that he feels are being left out of the level of what God is beyond what we are now. Fair enough. One thing that I might introduce is something like, if we're going to use words to define things, we have to be careful about the point at which we stop, right? If I say God is love, then the obvious next question should be, well, what is love? And I've spent quite a few hours attempting to do dialogos on the notion of what love is. And the more hours I do, the less I seem to know what it is. And I think that is the kind of, going back earlier when I first jumped on, the discussion that I was hearing was something around the question of, a dialectic in a Hegelian sense of two things fighting until we come to a synthesis that is beyond them, in terms of the religions or different narrative arcs of history. And all of this, I think, is kind of bound up in the same kind of issue, which is something like, we stop to measure things on the level where we are now, and we forget to continue to be.
Yeah. I think we did actually circle around some of that prior to you joining, Ken. Welcome. How are you?
Doing well. Nice to meet you. Apologize if that is redundant, but
no. So the question I'll run with, I suppose, is this. Okay, so like there's a lot of online conversation. We're in a conversational space right now. Why are you here? Like, what are you doing? What are you really doing? Now, you can unpack that for a while. And I think what you wind up, Ken, is exactly that. It's always, well, there's nothing really to grasp a hold of in the end. It's the grasping. It's the act of grasping. It's the ability to grasp, the ability to love, to attend, right? To attend to things. It's our attention that matters. That's where I wind up with love, is attention. It's where we place our attention. And that's really, it's like all the counterfeit loves are the things that we name. These are pointers. Pointers are easy. I can point any way I want and name anything I want. Did we not learn this from Bacon, Shakespeare? That which you can call a rose by any other name, right? So, and that includes shit, by the way. Things can smell all sorts of different ways, but we call them all just sorts of different names. And the question I have is, what are you, if you want to ask about what we're doing here, like, why, like, are we prescribing to each other ways of being? Are we saying you must be this, or don't forget this? Or are we acting in such a way that our behaviors are read in those ways, demonstrating those things? These different shades of being and the way that we come to agreement on whether or not we think these things are vital or of utmost importance begin to define, I think, not in a dialectical sense, but in a unifying, Vervaeke's term would be eidos, a structural, functional sense. Disparate processes brought together in synergistic fashion produce something which is capable of doing more than the individual parts. And that is a miracle. Okay, and that requires organization and effort and work and coordination, communication.
I have a
something
question,
like the.
Jacob.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering, Jacob, what would your God? What's your purpose? What would God have you do? Why are you alive? What is God to you? What is that? What is that?
I wish I knew.
Well, that's a pretty good question. I mean, it's a pretty good answer.
Honestly, I wish I knew. No, this is what I pray. This is what I pray for every single day.
What would you hope that he would have you do?
What? So that's the thing. That's my whole what I attempt to do, what I am trying to attempt to do, is to say, "Thy will, not mine, be done." I'm trying to remove my hopes. Like I had very specific hopes. I knew I wanted to be married with lots of kids. I love kids. Like there's this guy, Peter Santinelli, who did a very popular YouTube series on the Hasidic life. And I started crying watching that. Because he was showing the life that I wanted to live. And that's not what God wanted for me. And that killed me. I was suicidal. But that's not what God wanted for me. And so when I say on my channel, if God wants you to go to hell, where do you want to go? And people tell me I'm not there yet. I can't say hell. If God wants you to go to hell, where do you want to go? And I'm not sure that I'm being honest with myself when I say hell, but I say hell.
Well, I think for me, I get the sense that maybe for me that God hasn't decided where he wants me, but he would have me try to hold the door for those that are on their way out of hell. And I think that's what love is. I really do. I think I can't live like that. I don't know, man. Sorry.
Our field reporter Chad is breaking up.
Wind, 10% Chad.
Yeah.
Oh, am I roboting?
Just very muffled around.
You're COVID masking.
Jacob has to stop being really vulnerable and honest and moving when I'm trying to be angry at him. God bless you, Jacob.
Okay, Jacob.
Sorry. I thought that it was interesting when you asked the question, Chad. My mind immediately jumped to Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. I thought that would sort of come out, and obviously purpose is different. And that's one of the interesting things that I don't think, maybe it's because I'm cynical and old, I'm not sure that we always have purpose. We have things we ought to do, but we don't always have purpose. And that's different. And we ought, there are things that so the Micah 6:8 passage is quite interesting in that it gives you an individual and personal direction within Judaism, because Micah is speaking into very much his own people at that point. And I think, obviously as Christians, we've taken that and run with it as well. But it's very interesting that we have that ought and simple way of, approaching the Lord through faithfulness. And the other things will come along with it.
What is your faith in?
Well, I think that within the context of the verse, it's obviously talking with a Judaistic and
It's not what I'm asking. I'm not asking you that specific level of theological question. What is your faith in?
My faith's in Jesus.
Okay.
Yeah. My story is that I'm roughly the same age as Paul Vanderklay. Very similar trajectory. Was a missionary for 10 years, came back, didn't become a pastor, went back into normal life, normal work. And that's where I am today. Been involved in church, very much involved in church, but that's where I am today, 20 years later, back in the UK.
I haven't seen you around before, but welcome.
I've been around since the beginning, but I've been a quite quiet person.
I've been around for a long time.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I think God gives you the desires of your hearts. And if you can figure that one out, how that works, if you can lay that out propositionally for me.
That's
right?
what I was trying to say before, Sherry. If you have the desire for love, then you have the responsibility to give it. And don't worry about getting it. Because I know it sounds kind of weird, but like that to me is what can happen with a guy like me, and maybe Jacob, I don't know, or maybe all of us, is once I start to see what I'm not getting, it bogs me down. It starts to jam me up. I can't do anything. I can only see the thing that I can't get, or I'm not getting, or not even in an egoic way. It's just a way in which I can't see the truth about something. So I had to learn this. I had to do my best to clear all the crap out of the way, so that I can be made useful. And I know it just sounds so simple and corny and all that stuff, but if I truly have the desire for love, then I have a responsibility to give it. And
but Chad, it's complicated because I just heard you say, just be useful. And you have an idea of your mind of what it means to be useful. And there, because I resonate so much with what Jacob said, because I was going to be a missionary.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to be useful to God.
Yes.
And he didn't let me do that.
Mm-hmm.
And did that stop you from being useful?
I don't know. That's the whole thing, Chad, is I don't know if I'm useful.
See,
God decides that. God decides what to do with me.
No, I don't think that's true.
So wait a minute.
This is deep for me, Chad. This is
I understand, but here's the problem.
I understand what Jacob's saying, and this is what the book of Job gets to, because Job was a righteous man, and Job even says, if I had any idea of what you had planned for me, Job doesn't lament just his suffering. He laments everything.
Mm-hmm.
I understand.
And the thing is Job is looking to be useful, and he's looking to serve God, and God is hidden from him. And what's the answer that we get back is that God is doing something else, and he's forming Job, and he's birthing something inside of him. And Job there's no control, there's no idea, and it just happens.
Mhm.
So, yeah, Jess, I agree with you. I couldn't help but think. There was this new gentleman who joined our Olympia Estuary group this past session, and he sent me some emails after his first meeting, and he had talked about about that he'd been reading through like all of Hermann Hesse's novels, and he sent me these 3 pages from a Hermann Hesse novel where the character in the novel is this like homeless fool type of character, and he's dying, and like he's regretting his life, but he's having this conversation with God as he's dying, and God is telling him like that you were exactly what I wanted you to be. And it's just really beautiful and moving. I'll send you the pages. Actually, I put them in the Voxer, but I'll send them to you.
My kitty is saying hi to Jacob. I just wanted to say, my kitty's saying hi to your kitty, Jacob.
Go ahead, Chad.
Shadow has decided to be really playful right now. I don't know why, but she doesn't play with any of her toys, and right now she's like playing with all of her toys.
She's feeling the love.
The Spirit has descended upon you, Jacob. He has anointed you to preach good news to the poor.
So I think, like Ken was saying, it looks like he took off, but where we look at in terms of our attention and levels, where we presence ourselves. And I think a lot of times in this space, just by, I think Sherry pointed to it earlier, by virtue of the gifted capacity for people able to speak and range over these incredible landscapes of understanding, sometimes we do lose sight of these core experiences that we have that revolve around what it is we desire to be. And I think this is where we return to, or where we should return to as frequently as we can to resolve it, is answering that question. Who am I and what am I supposed to be doing? And you need help along that journey to find that out. And that, that's being done now in a collective space, in conversation together. So what do you want to do, Jacob? What do you want to do? What do you want to be?
Cathedral. Sorry.
You want to be a building?
Well, what I have been trying to do, at least in this little corner with my channel, is to serve.
Serve how? How do you see yourself serving?
You don't get to choose how you serve. That's not service. It's not service if you're lording it over people, right?
No,
I didn't mean it. I serve by whatever I can, by seeing what other people need and doing that which they need that I have a capacity to do.
Yeah, that last part. Yeah, each man has a talent, right? 1 or 10. What would you do with them? I think this has a large part to do with how we feel about whether or not, and this is when we look inside ourselves, we measure a certain value. And the God within us of goodness, the God of love, sees that infinite potential that we can tap into at any moment and truly believe I could be more, or what I am now is not currently being recognized or utilized. And it's a real feeling, right? That's what Gus is saying.
This is too much I in it for me.
Well, we've harangued the notion of I, but let's not forget, if you want to stay Old Testament, the name of God as he presents himself. What is it, Jacob?
Oh, right. Asher, Ehyeh. But that's the whole point of God, is I, thou, right? Baruch atah, blessed are you. And God is the other, not me.
But we don't want to destroy the I too, because that's Jacob, and I love Jacob too, and I don't want to destroy you.
No, Jacob, and I think this is where we're disconnecting. He's not the other. He is the relationship.
Yes.
No.
Like
this is Baruch
God is in the
Atah.
hyphen.
No, blessed are you. That's the highest name we have for God is you.
No, this is completely wrong.
Hold on,
Martin
wait.
Buber, I highly recommend it.
Okay, but hold on.
Yeah, I think you're reading Buber wrong.
Hold on. In the same way that pantheon of gods are continuously wrestling with each other to determine who is the greatest, and therefore who is subject to who. Each of us, like I was trying to point out with the example of my marriage, each of us is pressed up against our depictions of the absolute that's binding us in relation to the way in which we are in the world. Okay, so when Jacob is describing himself in relation to this thing, we don't expect that it's going to be exactly the way that Nate experiences it, because it seems like Jacob occupies a different part of the body that Nate does. That's what it seems like to me. And that therefore the conversation should be, by what manner do our different aspects of being relate to each other such that the product of it is goodness in being?
Lance had something to say.
Bobby Brady has joined the chat.
Bobby Brady.
I don't know. Who is this Lance that you speak of?
You need one of those based on mustache.
Point in here, it's like the Brady Bunch intro. It's like this merging of my childhood into Job, and what the hell are we talking about? How do we define this love thing? And
It's a story.
Jacob cherry picking a psalm. I can cherry pick a psalm that talks about his mercy and abundance.
Yeah, I chose not to play that game.
I keep looking at the title of this stream and going, wait, we got to get back to the machine, and how do we get? And then everybody goes skating off to the other.
Well,
I'm trying.
Okay, but I would just say we are certainly where we are alive. So whatever's occurring here, the exchange of information seems to be worthwhile. Like, it seems to be valuable to the people participating in it, despite Nate's original intentions. And I will say some of the best conversations I've ever had deviated from the original intention. But it's fine to try to weave it back in. Ultimately, I do think it is answering the question, because this is what I think is necessary. In the virtual space that we have access to, in the time that we have it, we have the capacity to converse together to answer this question of how it is that we wish to live with each other, truly. Because we are all participating in lots of structures outside of just this Zoom call. Governments where we happen to live, local and federal, or whatever administrative level you want to point to. And we're all subject to different things. And the question is, how is it that we actually want to pragmatically operate with each other? And that's always present. And we've had a divorce going on because we separated church and state in our minds and in our attempts to play with that concept. But hey, it's look, we need
Cindy.
This time we should all.
Can I ask Nate? So you said God's the hyphen of the relationship, and yet, and I think I'm with Jacob that God is other, and we are ourselves.
This is straight Boethius. Like, God is a relational substance. This is all you can find this in Aquinas too. It's like that God is fundamentally relational is just solid Christian theology. Now, for Jacob, that might be different. Although you can certainly,
I agree with you, he's relational, but he's not the hyphen, because if he's the hyphen, what's the other end? That's what I was going to ask you.
I'm sorry, Guy, I couldn't hear you.
Okay, so you were saying God was the hyphen in the middle?
Yes.
So, but the problem is, what's the other end? Because we're at one end, there's a hyphen, which is the relationship with God, and then you've got nothing at the other end. So my view is there has to be two others, and the relationship happens.
Oh no! Oh, that's okay. You're smuggling in, I think, not to use a word that's pejorative, perhaps, but you're smuggling in a dualism of sorts, where you're placing primacy on either end and not the middle. You have to place your primacy on the middle. What we've gotten stuck with for so long now is this notion of the polarities being the absolutes and the ultimates, alone.
God is also a coincidence of opposites. So, which is why this is my way of, when I say God is in the hyphen, that's what I'm pointing at. It's like God is not either of the, he's not either end of the polarity or the duality. He is the synthesis that is neither and both.
It's like if you look at a magnetic field, how it goes out and back around into itself, that whole thing. That
and which is also a
relationship,
donut,
right?
yeah, which is also a torus. And a slice of it is the infinity symbol. And there's all sorts of fun things that we can talk about geometrically.
Well, that's the same as with the poles. That's what we're doing. The polarity, the poles themselves are empty, right? But things expand toward them and then circle back around.
Well, yeah, you want to talk about 0 points and stuff like that. But this is, it would be akin to something like asking the question, point to something in creation that is not God or not from God. I dare you, right? It's like there's a paradox between the center and the perimeter.
Well,
right?
I was just going with the angle that, like, if God is the hyphen and the hyphen is the relationship, then the shape of the relationship is probably like that.
It's and that is the self-expression, which is what we are currently experiencing. Right. So we are, in other words, we are each manifestations, aspects of the divine being God, creator, and we are all arguing with each other or loving each other or vengefulling each other. What, I don't know, make up words with each other in the Zoom call and abroad in the world, arguing about how the world and being should be, trying to manifest it in a certain way. And who's right?
I didn't want to bring up the imaginal because I'm doing a thing on the imagination on Grail Country right now, so I'm like all there. But I'm glad Christopher Roberts asked this question because I didn't have to bring it up. How about Henry Corbin and Ibn Arabi on love and the imaginal? I think, actually, and we talked about this recently with Jedediah, that the key to the parousia as a Christian or the Messiah for the Jew, the key to this original participation consciousness is the imagination. And I think the fact that we live in a world that hasn't been able to create, like, have any new discovery or new inventions in I don't know how long, that our art and our poetry and it you know is flat and one-dimensional, in my opinion. It's sad, you know. I think it reveals that we've lost our imagination, and in order for us to, I'm not going to be able to say this the way I want to, but well, I'm just going to leave it there. What do you?
Well, it's the machine that causes them,
or not.
It's the machine. It's the machine that causes the loss of the imagination. Sherry, the machine is what causes the loss of the imagination.
Well, I think the machine is an extension of ourselves. Okay, the machine is because of a lack of imagination. Okay, it's that desert of uniformity that Hundertwasser talks about, right? It's the straight line. And the straight line to me is a shortcut, right? We want convenience, and that is a shortcut. You know, we want to be able to reach from our chair, from our nice easy chair over here, and grab the thing, whatever it is that we want, you know, the food or the pleasure or the whatever, the stimulant. You know, we don't want to get up and do anything for it. That's the straight line.
Right. It's quantitative, and the imagination doesn't. The imagination actually has no concern whatsoever over the quantitative.
Well, so I would point out that as far as Corbin goes and Ibn Arabi and the rest, there is a distinction made between the imagination and the imaginal that may be relevant. But
well, okay. I've always made the distinction, Tyler, just for your information, between fancy and imagination. Fancy is when you're not finding out the work of God. This is how George MacDonald puts it, okay? Fancy is when you're not working towards finding out the works of God. And imagination is the duty of the imagination, he says, is to find out the works of God. Okay,
Yeah,
so
she's
those would be the
talking
two
about it in
distinct
in a
distinctions.
Coleridgean, Barfieldian, MacDonald sense of the imagination. So that's sort of like a kind of way in which I think that the British Christian tradition kind of like stumbles upon this thing that I think is orthodoxy misses,
can I
which
frame
is
it
the
this way?
which is the positive role of the imagination.
Can I frame it this way? Like the McDonald's imagination that we have is this thing about the machine and us as wanting to be efficient. Like that I want to be able to reach over, that I want convenience, that I'm terribly lazy, is like our anti-anthropic nature. The machine is a function of us automating things.
Exactly.
Because that's what we do. We automate
Right.
things because then it's more energy efficient. Because we do it the same way we've always done it.
Yeah.
So it's about the energy efficiency, and it's anti-anthropic. That it's become a crutch that prohibits the development of imagination. Because rather than imagining things, they're being presented things through the set screen. Is what I think Nate was trying to bring in when he said, like, the machine is causing it. So, but it's like that thing that it's shaped. The shaping is simultaneous both ways. Like we shaped the entertainment industry, and it shaped us back, and now we're feeling the pangs of the way we.
It's also
shaped
that
it.
also goes for the tyrants and dictators, right? We shape them, and they shape us. Like that's literally what happens.
So
I would say to the degree that we do not do that is the degree to which decay seeps in, and you're not getting proper feedback, and that's how things become bad. That's because what's occurring is, so what's occurring in Hollywood, for instance, is you have a committee which awards Golden Globes, right? It's not like the people are saying this is what we prefer. And so the disconnect, the disjointed way in which feedback is occurring between
Well, and also Tyler, because it's enslaved by the reign of quantity, because the calculus that goes on is what is the quickest way for us to make a whole bunch of money with a movie, which is just to repeat the same old formulaic crap over and over and over again because we know it will make money. So very few films of any artistic merit get made.
Right. Yeah. So you just get more of less quality, which is quantity.
And artificial intelligence is going to make this only much worse.
Yes,
because it will make crap art with basically zero effort.
I'll just say this. I'll say this boldly, not for too long though.
The 1984 told us that. It's very interesting that one of the things that Orwell came with, and I think that it's a constant struggle, isn't it? That even agriculture and everything else, that if you look at the stuff they're saying is that people wanted beer and they wanted a bit of bread because both of them were really good for you and actually increased your calorific value very highly. Of course, that then trapped you from being a nomad with a fairly sedentary lifestyle that had lots of recreation in it into being a farmer, which didn't, and you were constantly at it. But it enabled you to have more people, which is also seen as a blessing. So we're constantly in that trap of wanting leisure,
don't you think that
ease, but at the same time, the very things that enable that to happen and make that better are the things that will trap us into the next level.
Well, okay. So this is good because I think that is that's the idea of every blessing is a curse, every curse is a blessing, right? And so here we are again at the machine. So how is it a blessing and how is it a curse and how do we live with it?
Well, I think Sherry pointed us in the right direction by bringing in the idea of the imagination in that sense that you're using it, that comes out of like some of the genius of the British Christian tradition. And that is the thing that allows the possibility of the transformation of it.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. You have to imagine it.
Right.
Okay. So all right. So then back to the fantasy thing. So that it seems like the primordial state of consciousness, that is awareness without input, is infinite potential. You can think of it that way. right? Which is infinite fantasy without anchor points or structure or anything. It's all the potential. And so that's what we have in varying degrees, the ability to tap into at any moment. Now, how it is, let's say in the primordial womb of being, both in our minds and in our bodies, we draw that embryo out into furtherance. That's the question. And so what I'm saying is, young babe, young child in the womb, alone in thoughts of fantasy, which is all you have, this primordial state of being. Why does that capacity exist? Why do you exist? And that question that I pose to it, drawing it out, what is it that it happens when it comes into this world? Well, suddenly all of that infinite potential collapses. And that is an enormous pain, by the way. You want to know why children cry when they come into this world? I think it's partly this. It's both to get the lungs going, but partly because there's an enormous collapse. There's a shock. There's a simultaneous collapse and expansion of reality and being.
Absolutely.
Right? That's the blessing and the curse. And so you weep for all this.
Just you have to talk about that.
Yeah. And so now the question is, when I'm confronted by the world where my fantasy or the whatever that primordial state of being that I have layered up by degrees as my body grows in the womb and as I then further grow in the world, these fantasies I carry within me, how do they comport with the world? How are they adjusted by, and how do they influence and form the world around me? This is the question. And sometimes it's going to be by vengeance, and sometimes it's going to be by love. And I think as a father, what I'm learning is that the kind of creature I am inviting into the world by doing battle with their imagination, what they wish, their fancy, by virtue of authority, where I feel the fear of their fantasy being denied by my world that I inhabit. If I fill that with authority, they become one thing. But if I fill it with an invitation and a condescension, in a sense, where I leave my world that I'm so accustomed to, and I descend to where they are, and I try to be where they are and speak to them where they are, it's a very different thing. And what they become and what I become by virtue of that relation is a very different thing than edict. And there's a break in when you're going,
I think so. First of all, I have a point. What I've noticed as well is we've got a bottom row who haven't spoken yet, and I wanted to just grab into that as well, because we at the top have been speaking and been here for a while. And if Mr. Brady, this Brady Bunch thing. I'm sorry, my cultural context says I have no idea who you're talking about. I know it's an American TV program at some point, but it's just like
it's the black squares on the screen. So in the Brady Bunch television show intro, like the
Brady
family
Brunch?
members were in all brunch. The Brady Bunch, they were all in little black squares like this. So that's what
And we are in perfect Brady Bunch alignment right now with
we are
3 rows of 3.
Yeah. Now, if we held that to our ideal, we wouldn't allow anyone else to join or leave. And that's our goal.
Alice can check us on that one.
Alice was a character in the Brady Bunch, by the way. So that's why.
I thought that's very why you were calling herself Alice. But
Alice was the maid, right? The housekeeper? Yeah.
She was the housekeeper, yeah. That's a good one, Jacob.
It was either Alice or Marsha. I couldn't decide which one. Or maybe
so hold on. There's a point.
That one of the things you talked about imagination, and I thought, in the beginning of Genesis, God exists, and He is spirit, and He is without constraints, and He is full of imagination, and yet He chose then to constrain the whole thing and to make relationship with those. Both Adam and Eve had relationship with God, that they walked with Him in the garden. And it's interesting that even if He had that completely unconstrained potential, He chose to constrain it and to talk to human beings and to make that relationship, which could be a hyphen. I will concede that one at this moment before you, Nate.
It's fun.
It's that it was interesting to me that You were talking about the baby coming into the world and the unconstrained imagination of the womb, and then the realities of having to interact with mum in a big way. It's quite interesting that God also, in some ways, went through that process.
Guy, have you been watching the Torah studies thing I've been doing?
Sorry.
Because the one yesterday was remarkably on point to what you were saying today about God choosing to restrict himself. That's choosing to restrict yourself may in fact be the most godly thing that we don't want to do.
Yes.
Yes. Because that my friend chose to not actually restrict himself in the earlier example. And
I'm not gonna poke Nate too much, but love in Hebrew, ahava, comes from the root hav, to give, right? And I think the hardest thing that a parent does is stop giving.
so here you can't have and hold.
When does a parent stop giving? I have adult children. I've never stopped giving.
You have to let go
serious.
of your kids. You have to, when you raise them, you have to let them go. The process of letting them go.
That doesn't mean that you stop giving.
It does, though.
It doesn't.
It does,
No, it
Nate.
does not.
That's the
No, it
thing.
doesn't. I think you're using the sense of gift in way too limited a sense.
Yep, but you don't have actual being unless you give it. Well, it's the story of the father pushing the son on the bike, and the father's got to let go and let the son ride.
And that is, what is that?
Giving it up.
It's also a gift. It's the gift of freedom.
Semantics.
And independence.
Semantics.
We agree, Nate. We agree.
We agree. We're with you, Nate.
I would also say, if Luke were here and we'd agree, I think that concept of love that carries over into Christianity is the henosis by kenosis.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the self-emptying, sacrificial love. It's absolutely that, right? And then from an Orthodox perspective, which is this kind of focus on the passions, is a lot of that is through contemplation and how you work through your daily prayers, right, Jacob? And you submit into the fasting and all these other sorts of things, whatever. It is about a denying and restricting of certain aspects of yourself. So I think that's a common thread.
I'm just happy Guy also has a kitty, because it's really important to have pets.
This is Esme. I didn't like to mention it when Jacob started talking about self-restriction. Of course, Philippians has a slight mention of that somewhere in about the second chapter. He who was God did not consider it to be the equality with God to be something to grasp, but gave it up. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's one of the key elements of Christianity, is that we believe that God was able to restrict himself, and by doing so to free us, which is the amazing contradiction of these things, which is found in the remnants of my breakfast cereal.
Well, I think one of the things I've been thinking about in terms of this, which is really interesting, is I've been contemplating a lot about what happens in the parable of the prodigal son. And so the son shows up and tells the dad, "You're dead to me. Give me my inheritance now," right? Which is going to affect the father and everyone else he's supporting and everyone else. And he gives it to him. And he goes and blows it on crack and prostitutes and everything else, and blows the whole wad. right? Now, the father at the time could have said, hey, that's not really wise of you, son. If I give you this money, you're going to go blow it on crack and hookers and everything else. And he lets him go do it. And he does just that, blows the whole thing until he comes on to himself and remembers and, comes back, returns to the father. But I've been thinking about that context because, I'm in recovery, and I think about with like I have this tough love sort of thing towards my kids. And I looked at that instance, which was giving him up, that's the ultimate letting go of the bike, Jess, right? Like he literally and so this has been part of my story. He's like, okay, run down that road, sex, drug, and rock and roll it up. All you need to do, son, until you come onto yourself and you return to me.
Amen. Amen. Flaming swords, though, are going to guard the garden until you figure it out.
Well, I think Sherry and Jess are still here. If you want to keep running it, people still want to talk. But I gotta get out. I'm
gonna have to jump out too.
Yeah, I gotta make dinner for my family.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go here in a minute.
All right.
Might be time to conclude.
Jacob, thank you for coming.
Yeah, Jacob, that was all.
I was happy to be
Rabbi
with your presence.
is here too.
Yeah, I think you made me an administrator here if it's on Grail Country.
I think, yeah, you are. It is on Grail Country. So, if people want to keep talking, please, by all means do. But I just have to go make dinner.
So if people felt like they had things to say, I could stick around.
All right, great, Lance. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Lance. Maybe I'll join later.
I'm sorry, was this on another channel other than yours, just Jacob?
Yes. So I am a guest
Where do all this
on
YouTube comments are coming from?
This is actually Grail Country. That's where you see the on the top corner. You see the Grail Country icon there.
I've never been there before.
That's Nate's channel. But
apologies to Nate.
StreamYard recently allows this thing where, as a guest on StreamYard, you can actually stream to channels you as a guest are, and hopefully that's going to help us figure out the admin thing with Randos United and stuff. Mo's trying to figure all of this stuff out. But this is right now, it's streaming on Randos United, on my channel, and on Grail Country simultaneously.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we use it for church, and it's really, really powerful.
StreamYard is really powerful, and they're ramping up. I've kind of become a StreamYard evangelist of sorts, but it's where I think a lot of these conversations are going, partially because there's a lot of people who want to be lurkers, and that's fine. Like, you don't have to feel like you have to speak, but it's also really nice to have people just, because there's nothing that type of video like engagement is completely different from just text. It's text robs us of a certain, well, I mean, even the internet, which reminds me, hey, Andrew, you want to go to synagogue with me tonight? Andrew's like 2 miles away from me. But yeah, I mean, this has been part of my whole thing is getting off of the internet, but first and foremost, going from text to at least speech, but also video, because it's very different when you're actually talking to somebody. Like right now, I'm working on a Substack post where I'm going to talk about the quiet part. And one of the things that I've noticed on, Richard, if you want to come, synagogue's at 6. So it's pretty far from you. But we could all three of us go. That would be fun.
If Richard's coming, I'll come.
Bye, Jess.
Bye, Jess. So if as far as the quiet part, one thing that I've noticed is on the internet, you can say things that are so stupid that intelligent people will stop responding to you. And in real life, when that happens, and that happens quite a bit, like somebody says something really stupid and everybody like gets quiet, that doesn't happen in text ever. And so we get people who say things that are so stupid, everybody else is silenced by their stupidity, and they think they said something really smart. I've seen that happen so many times.
Yeah, I think in general people have a problem interpreting feedback, and we have a problem giving good feedback too. We have intentions about what we mean when we say something, but the form that we express it in triggers someone in such a way that they can't receive it. It's very, very common. So it's certainly one thing that we can work on together, that I've been trying to work on, is the skill that I relay my perspective, right? That I not
right, which I think is, watching how you work, Tyler, but it's also something that I've seen work well, is asking people questions.
Yeah.
And not gotcha, no, just asking good faith questions.
Well, gotchas are fun too sometimes when they're silly, you know?
Yeah, if it's meant
Like
right. If it's meant in the right spirit, right?
Oh, yeah,
I'm the smart ass gift guy.
Yeah.
So I get.
Well,
that.
I have really weird ideas sometimes. I don't even recognize them. Someone points them out, and I'm like, oh yeah.
I just looked at Grail Country. Looks interesting.
Tyler, you haven't been around for a while. Where'd you go?
No,
What happened to you?
What happened to me?
Oh no! I was asking Tyler.
No,
not
let
you,
him
guy.
let him go. Let him go. Let him go. Go for it, guy.
Go ahead, guy.
I got to a point where I had saturated myself with PDK for a while, and then stopped.
Mm-hmm.
He's
too propositional.
Did you start breaking out in Calvinism, or what happened?
No. When I heard of the Asbury revival, I was like, Guy must be loving this.
It was way before that I stopped being in here for a while, though. It was actually what it was the Exodus 90 last year. I did it and never came back to the channel. Interestingly enough, after Easter last year, I have to go have some honeydews.
Take care.
Bye.
So Tyler, now you can tell us where you had been on off to.
Well, I can give you a mundane answer. I can tell you that it's a secret. I can give you metaphorical answers. I was in the desert eating locusts and honey.
I see. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And in that desert and locusts and honey, you've been contemplating this whole idea that kind of, isn't it, escape, subversion, conquest, all this other sorts of ideas of where we find ourselves in this moment? Isn't that what you were?
Well, what I've been doing, so what I've been trying to do anyways, is to really get to know somebody. So we talk about empathy. To empathize is to attempt to be, right? To settle into being. So to really get to know somebody, you have to be them as much as possible. And to do that, you have to live like them. Yeah, you have to live with them, be with them, see how they speak with each other. So I like to go into places where people are gathered and be with them. So I've been doing that for a little while, just wandering around and experiencing themselves from within, because it helps me understand how they value themselves. And it also shows me stuff about myself that I never would have seen ever until I was put in that context. And that's so valuable. And it seems to have a useful function. and I'm trying to still figure out how to convey that, how to manifest its full value in this space, right? It's like something like a sorting hat, right? If I spend 10 minutes with you, I can probably, maybe half an hour, I can probably find you a place where you would sit in really quickly, like acclimate and be enormously productive in terms of like synergy, conversational synergy anyways, sometimes other stuff. It's like it's a weird discernment talent. Let's name it that. Yeah. I think it's really interesting to find people that have that. That's very useful. And we need to employ it here because there's simultaneously a whole lot of people that feel like something should be done, and they're deeply undervalued in terms of like how it is they might participate in that, to help manifest like both like their own inner desires, like their drives that are so common to all of us and that are being underserved, but also like this, the whole heroic journey thing, like this call to adventure that extends outwards in the culture that binds us, like our collective interests to our individual interests. So
I actually have to go. I don't know how StreamYard's new thing, this is the first time I've done the guest streaming thing. I don't know if I leave, if on my channel and Randos United this is going to keep on going or not. I guess we will find out. And Andrew, I'll let you know later if Richard decides to come, and then we can all go together.
Sounds good.
Bye, people.
Have a good one. I've got to head out too. Otherwise, I'd stay here forever.
I was going to say the same. Take care, gentlemen.
Nice.
I don't know if we're still live or not. We might be.
It says it up there. Yeah, 2.5 hours. We're live right now. Yeah.
Okay. So land the plane, Tyler.
All right.
So listening to kind of everything you guys were talking about, and to kind of this whole idea of escape, subvert, or conquest, like this whole moment that we're in, right?
Yeah.
I've had this sense, which I was talking with, because Nate wants to talk about this, because he's going to be talking to Paul Kingsnorth, who obviously you're familiar with, his writing Against the Machine and so on and so forth.
Not that familiar. I mean, yeah, by just by superficial examination. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, what you were talking about, where you connect people, like I've been thinking about a lot about, like, I've needed to unplug myself out of certain things, like to make sure that there are mechanisms of the machine, and I'm being shaped by things, even if I know, like, it's like, even if I know something, like for example, hypnotist, even if you know you're sitting in front of a hypnotist, they can still hypnotize you, right?
It depends. Not everyone's like that, but yeah, the majority.
But in large measure, like you can, and so when you give yourself unto some of these mechanistic things that, and so to me, it's almost like it's an unplugging, making sure you're unplugging from certain elements of it, knowing your own limitations to a certain extent, like unplugging from certain elements of it. But then to figure out is, okay, so then how do I choose my points to where I'm going to interact with it, or try to because I have to participate in communities and in nations and in everything else. I think Sherry's things about we go to ourself and into our family and kind of work our way out. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, but because I have this sense, like you talked about parallel societies wanting to get out, like I have this deep escape sense in me right now to escape out to certain things. But right now I'm just doing an unplugging, trying to unplug from certain aspects of the machine. And I can do that through my daily life, through some of the practices I'm doing, not participating in certain digital elements and those sorts of things. So I know you've been thinking a lot about that. And I think where Nate's inclination is, not everyone's going to escape. And some people are going to live in cities, and there are ways, quite frankly, to healthily disconnect from the machine and still live in a city, and so on and so forth. But as you've been experiencing kind of these other people and how they would have these discourses and these dialogues, I think there's this sense of, I think we need to be very careful about what we're plugged into, and then try and find those places where you can plug in and not get sucked in too much by the machine.
Yeah, so I think it's this really deep struggle of probably always comes back to trust. If I'm not building it myself, someone else is handing it to me. Is it good for me? You say so. If I live it, what happens? Right? By their fruits ye shall know them. And the fruits aren't always apparent right away. And sometimes you want to give up on something because it, like lifting weights is a great example. In the immediate term, it's painful, but in the long term, you're expecting some kind of growth. I would say that everyone has a sense of whether or not they're living in accordance with a sense of balance within themselves. And if it feels out of balance, they wind up here-ish, right? They follow rabbit holes down into a question about like, well, why is this going on? And why do I feel this way? And what do I do about it? And there are different strategies you can take if you want to live in a city and live a modern life. There's lots of resources that people have. So there are plenty of people that have found a kind of harmony in a modern life and even improved on it in enormous ways, like local organic community gardens, like all sorts of ways in which people make their space better. I think what we do need perhaps is a good repository that we can build together, that we can point each other to, that no matter where we live, we have a good sense of like how it is we can disconnect or connect in healthy ways, whatever we actually truly feel called to. And that true calling part, I guess that's the rub, because there are so many like hypernormal stimuli in our media environment that we are hypnotized by. I'd say the question is the thing that I'm plugged into increasing my state of awareness and my sense of the ability to choose for myself, like how to nourish myself? Or is my continuing interaction with it reducing my sense of awareness and reducing my capacity for self-governance? And that's a pretty straightforward litmus test. And if we follow that, I guess we'll kind of settle down into something that's available for us to do that improves the lot of our lives inwards and outwards.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait. Do you have control over this? Did it fall to you? Does anyone have control over this?
It's we're only on Grail country.
Yeah, who has admin? Do you have admin?
Let's see here. What do you need me to do?
Oh, no, I was just wondering if you have it. Yeah.
Yeah, he gave me admin access to it. So, but I don't know if I logged in that way. We're still broadcasting on Grail country. I don't think Randos United or the other places it was streaming would still be up, but we're still broadcasting on Grail country.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, it says Randos United is running as well. Oh, great. The inmates can run the asylum now, Tyler. We've broken the matrix.
All right, so scalability. All right, I'll let me touch on that for a second. standardized sets of tools. There are already plenty of standardized sets of tools. Culture is a kind of standardized set of tools for managing like an exteriorized. It's like an external carrying capacity of knowledge. That you can get for free when you're born into it. So there's all sorts of scalability, but what you're asking is, can I find a universal pattern that I can rubber stamp outwards? And I would say sure, but only to the extent that the genetic code is only the code to tell you how to make proteins.
Yeah.
The rest of the structure of the body and how it relates is not at all driven by the standardized code that sits within the center of each cell.
Right.
All of that is driven by something else entirely.
And I picked up like earlier when you talked to Nate that in the way how he was trying to get away from these totalizing systems is like when you jumped up the level, he was jumping to a totalizing, it was totalizing systems all the way down, right?
It's so easy to make that step. Like it's so easy because in the imaginal realm there is no distance, and so in abstractions we can just there's literally no hop, step, or jump. They overlap. Think like all things overlap. I think we can make machines that increase our ability to pray. I would say that a rosary is a machine that increases your ability to pray in a certain way. To the extent that you're calling a machine a fixed and automatic process. So, there's 108 beads or whatever, right? Like you're keeping something the same. You're holding a similar pattern throughout. That what happens is the individual then conforms to that pattern. And there's a different kind of prayer, which is more akin to a generative function, where you're no longer conforming part of yourself to a thing, but you're actually generating. You're the source of a thing, and that's actually a slightly different form of prayer. Like it's just a different way of being in relation to the world. So I think that's why there's a division between the act of creation and resting, or maintenance. Where is Grim? Yeah, where is Grim? Is he lurking? I love that guy.
I don't think so. I haven't seen him comment here anytime soon.
Oh, he was in here earlier.
Yeah, I think by the way, I've spent most of my adult life trying to pray, and I found it extremely difficult, particularly like the extemporaneous. And I had never been exposed to meditative practices really in my evangelical Christian life.
Yeah.
And here I have this, it's this, by the way, it's Russian, so maybe I shouldn't be using this, but the act of the prayer rope, like when you talk about this, it's doing something, it's rewiring something in my system. Because like when I get, my friend may be this cross, I get these in my hands and I start doing kind of my liturgical prayers, and I get into, I use AA elements where I meditate on my day, the part of my day, and then I get into this Jesus prayer, and then I start doing some breathing exercises along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is for me, so I use these. They are like you say. There are these things that start rewiring me and getting me into a place to where ultimately where I do try to get to, and it doesn't happen a lot, but it's happening more and more, Tyler.
Yeah,
is I'm getting to the place where I lose time.
Yeah. Right. Okay. That's beautiful.
And that so to me, and you hear it like when you hear monastics, that's what they try to get to, which is that's that point where I'm not thinking, like I'm not imagining, like I'm just, it's that be still and know I'm God thing, and I'd heard it described. And so, but through these really practical, like it's these practical things that I can do, I have found this way to try and get to that space more and more and more.
Yeah. Okay. So what that seems to do is like it familiarizes yourself with the sense of being aligned with ultimate will, right? Where you don't wish to be otherwise. And so you get a feel for that. You're like, wow, that's what that feels like. Awesome. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then what happens is you snap out of the meditation, or you come out too, and you're like, oh no, corporeal body, I'm still here. And then you have to take that and search for that feeling here also. like to extend it out as much as possible and share it or invite other people into it. And then what that is I think like the essence of religion. That's the essence of what it is that we're manifesting as the collective, self-expressed and self-agreeing continuation of the justification for life, like why it is we all are doing what we're doing at all. And it can diverge in really interesting ways without being self-destructive. It's just we have to find a way to not allow our own personal traumas to fuel our desire for security by eliminating the unknown in the rest of the other that we're in contact with. That seems to be what it is. We get exacerbated by this intense fear of self-destruction and self-denial, and then that becomes our God, right? And then we sacrifice that personal choice and creative power to the tyrant, to the dictator, right? Which ultimately becomes a scapegoat because Putin will always get taken out. Zelensky's going to have his day one day too. Like that's like nobody talks about that. Like nobody talks about that. Everybody's pro Zelensky in certain portions of the media, but you're really cheering, another man on to like a continual sense of impending doom because you're constantly at war with other parts of like what they're calling a national identity or an ethnic one or whatever they want to say at the time. It's just reasons for division rather than reasons for unification. So, okay. So here's in the same way that
think about. So one thing I want to talk about. So one of the things that I was thinking about, and this is like this digital world or whatever. So thinking about Vervaeke, like we have to focus, like we have this relevance realization and salience, and like there's all this stuff that we could focus on and it's coming at us, right? And it would appear as if we're living in a time where the speed, like we're getting like, in Star Wars, where they're getting ready to jump to warp speed, and then all the stars come. The speed with which all this information is coming at us is overwhelming. And you had talked about like when an infant, it's almost like we come into this particularity in some ways, and like everything collapses, like there's this collapsing. I'm thinking of Wolfgang Smith, who talks about when you put an instrument like inside where you're trying to measure something, and I don't know if it's called the quantum enigma or whatever, but then everything collapses, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the road to Emmaus, that as soon as they eat the Eucharist and they finally realize it's Christ, he disappears, like he vanishes. It says he vanishes, but it's like it almost collapses on itself.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things that I've been contemplating this, because like once I come out of one of those moments, like I feel a peace that is beyond understanding. If that, I don't have words for it, but I've been trying to search for what that would describe. And one of the things that it does is it's removed me from all of this sensory overload, right? And it just gets you to the place to where when you stop all the thinking and the analyzing and the problem solving and the worry, all the crap that's going on, all the computing or whatever that would be, when you stop all that, it seems as if a brief period of that time gives you so much rest. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's like a hyper sleep mode, or I don't know how to describe what happens. And so now let's get out of this, whatever. And it would appear that like even 5 minutes of that would be like 20 hours of sleep or something. I'm using stupid words to describe those things. But one of the things I wanted to ask, I just wanted to throw out, I'm throwing that out there so you can think about that, is that I'm thinking that it has something to do with getting out of this hyper mode of all of this stuff and everything I'm inundated with. And when you can break free and you can somehow just get to that place that there's something amazing that happens in that.
Yeah. Well, it's okay. So the building up of I'll just use shorthand here and we can unpack whatever. The building up of the Antichrist-like machine, which is the sacrifice of will for the sake of some egoic drive of another, right? Where you're giving up your own relation to well, you're existing at the wrong level, perhaps. Let's say if you feel a disjunct, then you're recognizing that you're existing at the wrong level. There may this is what I really struggle with. There may in fact be people who feel most comfortable submitting to and being held in that way, right? Like, and that's in fact what we're seeing. And then much of what we can describe in the state of like geopolitics or the history of the world is a story of a minor group of individuals who hold enormous amounts of power, directing the will of a large number of people underneath them. And that is just the reality of the way in which conflict has been handled in much of the West and the East, a whole lot of the East too, and perhaps in all circumstances. No. I can think of some exceptions, but there is a question that each of us individually has to answer with regards to whether or not we're satisfied with how we're being in the world, right? Whether or not we're actually satisfied. Because if we feel that dissatisfaction, it's an indication that there's some imbalance, there's some lack that's within us, and we have to be true to that. Like if you're not true to that, what happens is that's the seed of the shadow, and it grows to the same proportion that you ignore it, and that you act in a way in the world that ignores it, the reality of it. So, and it eventually comes back to bite you, or manifests itself as some element of chaos in the way that you interact with others, so that it can be seen, right? Because eventually it demands to be seen, and that's essentially where we are collectively. Our shadow has demanded to be seen, and we're seeing it. It's expressed outwards. It's projected outwards. And when you're unplugging, when you're giving yourself a rest, partly what you're doing, I hope, right, in each of us is probably something like realizing it's like forgiving ourselves. It's washing our hands clean of the blood of our generation. Let me say it that way, right? It's recognizing that we don't have to be, if we all truly stop trying to take control and therefore justify all of it, right? Like if I stop trying to totalize my attempt to wash my generation clean of its own blood, to make it perfect, if I stop trying to do that, and if I just like collapse that in on myself, and we all just do that together, then I think that manifests the best example of how we could be. But it won't be the only one, and it isn't always the only one. And so we all get a choice to be where we want to be. And I get so frustrated sometimes because I interact with people and I have a sense inside me that, wow, you could be so much better. Like truly, I see so much potential within you. And the way that you're acting in the world right now is, well, it's truly unfortunate. It's just an intuitive, very strong impression. And there are grades to that. And I wonder how it is, how it is that we can responsibly relay that kind of feeling to each other in a sense of compassion and invitation, and like invitation towards like the encouragement of the realization of our true sense of value, whatever that happens to be. Fight for the aristocracy or submit to the oligarchy.
Yeah, that kind of got to what you were talking about to some extent there, like where Chad and Jess were talking past each other a little bit. They were talking because I knew exactly what Chad was talking, which is about usefulness. And Jess was trying to say he wanted to be useful to God in a missionary sense, or like Jacob had this sense. He was I loved that moment. It was very real, right? It was vulnerable. And they were both sharing moments where they sensed that they wanted to do these things to be useful. And they got to this point where that door was shut. Let's just say that those paths were cut off.
Yep.
And those doors were shut. And what Chad was talking about was, well, you may have this path, but what you can do today is you can go serve someone or something. God's not going to stop you from serving someone or something today. And you can be useful in that day. And those sorts of things, like those simple acts, let's just say simple acts of kindness, simple acts of getting out of yourself, are ways that can draw you to, like as an individual where you're talking, those are glimpses of let's just call it the kingdom of heaven, or connection. Like it's about how you're connecting into people. And those are simple ways, like you can find these simple things you can do. Because one of the things I found, which is this thing that I'm figuring out how to do, you do not have to be smart to do this. You do not have to know anything of Hegel or Nietzsche or Jung, or you don't have to know all of the theology, and you don't need to understand the God-man concept, two natures. You don't have to know any of these things. However, simple but not easy. To be willing to do this is a different thing, but it's not hard. But how many people in our society, this is the interesting thing, are going to be willing to try and do things like this?
Well, that's part of it, yeah. So I think a lot of people are experiencing it as difficult, in the same way that if you don't learn certain things at a certain age, they become more difficult to learn later on. There's a certain period where parts of us are more plastic. So if I learn to ride the bike at 4, I'll be fantastic by the age I'm 10. But if I don't learn to ride until I'm 30, there's usually like a certain amount of ceiling I can get to. We just only have so many available spaces we can expand into once we've already expanded into a bunch of others. I think a lot of people are feeling tension right now with regards to inner voices telling them yay or nay about that simple way of being in the world, right? So that they're experiencing like competing attentions and interests, even with something like service, like the idea of service. So for instance, I can find a whole lot of people on the internet right now co-opted in the idea of service, but it's really massive. It's like a self-gratification, right? A kind of pride, a name taking of one's own. And so like there are lots of ways that we get pulled in and like trapped in a self-assessment where we're not actually articulating to the other parts of ourselves how we might give ourselves permission, something like that, so like being of service in some sense it can serve a useful function in terms of teaching humility. That's certainly true. But there's another element of this which I think this may be on the side of the argument that Jacob is leaning into, which is this aggressive energy, right? Which is like this justice must be. I must do something in the world to assert the sense of structure that some aspect of being is saying should be the case. And yet here I'm watching in the world all of these other structures getting built that are harming all these people. And what are we doing about it? I think a lot of people feel that way. And then so trying to act in any way that precludes them from like really manifesting their sense of value in the space, right? So like just a quick example of in America, for instance, if you don't vote for a particular party, you're seen as not participating in like the fundamental aspect of how it is that our culture's supposed to be manifested. It's like an actual cultural value, like a taboo that in certain places will brand you as a kind of heretic, and in other places you'll get cheered, right? Like the anarchists or the communists will cheer you on for all of that. So it's so difficult because all
by
that's
not
out there.
participating, which does have an effect, right? And so you could actually, the practical thing is we do live in a republic, and we got 2-party republic and everything else, so on and so forth, is that if more people did participate, that system that's there could be transformed to be something more like something you would like, right? Or manifest things that you think would maybe give people a better chance to be able to attain certain amounts of, flourishing, so to speak. So yeah, and then the uselessness of it. I get it. But I see that as almost being like both sides of that argument. I understand them, but it's just this. It's kind of like the cat chasing its tail.
Well, and that's exactly right, and that's exactly why it's a perpetual motion machine that we call life. That cat chasing its tail is exactly it. Yeah, and that's the maintenance cycle of life. It's dirty. It's messy. It really is. Like, it's messy. We do all that we can to avoid how messy we are. Right? We've done so much of our culture is specifically around the maintenance of our personal human mess. It's like, like our hygiene and the way that we talk with each other, our language, all this stuff is like,
and a lot of it's the external mess.
Yeah. Well, it's the internal too. Yeah, you don't want it's the internal too. There's think of all the aphorisms and idioms and expressions relating around like don't air your dirty laundry, right? Don't participate in a public display of your mess, right? Like there's something about saving face in other cultures like Japan or Far Asian cultures. There's this notion of honor, and I think, well, there are reasons for that, but in a world that is no longer carrying a lineage associated by a name, where like truly people are like trying to collectively figure out how to recover the value of the things that were carried by their family values and are just being dropped. That's just it's a different. I think what that process, it has to be shepherded. I think that's the value of shepherds in a sense. To get the sheep to move from one field to the next, or to come and rescue them from the crevices that they inevitably fall into, you have to like go and do the thing and like gather shepherds and sheepdogs and get it done. And that constitutes kind of a right relationship between the people who can watch and the people who can lift up out of crevices and the people who can fend off wolves and all of that to the benefit of another part of the creation. So I think there's an enormous number of young men and young women in this space that feel the call to do things like that. And they're participating in all these like traditional patterns, church planting, and now it's been morphed into this concept of an estuary and like trying to organize around getting people together to, and Vervaeke's got his efforts, and there's an element
organizing a signal on Randos United that will draw people in, and then we'll have the programs that we can put them through that will transform them. That's another thing we're trying to build, or some are trying to build around here. Yeah.
There's a lot of people building a lot of things, and I've got my own thing. It's not really my own thing. I would describe it more as like, like a service. Like it's an attempt to find out what patterns people actually are healthfully being nourished by, and give them a way to reliably access that. But ultimately, look, the aim is my aim. I'll just state my aim. My aim is to return people to a living environment, right? Where like when you walk through the woods, it's a very different experience than when you walk through a cubicle forest, right? There's a very different sense of the spirit. And I don't want to entirely disparage cubicles. I mean, I spent some time in a cubicle. I beautified it. But there is something about being in an environment that's populated by shapes and structures and relationships that are continuously in exchange of energy, are continuously in relation, that all are self-expressive and self-generative, and that the bearing forth of that fruit is intrinsic within itself. versus a modern office, which requires the maintenance of humans and or robots that make the humans, or humans that make the robots, to maintain it, to keep it in a certain state. And that this might be fundamentally a big difference between how it is that we're relating to what we call the machine versus what we call a living being, right?
One of the things, yeah. So one of the things that's really interesting, as the Chat GPT CEO was talking, and one of the fascinating things is they thought at one point there was this understanding they felt like maybe certain blue collar jobs were going to be the first to go, but what they're finding is it's the white collar jobs that it's replacing more quickly. And that would include people like actually like press, because a lot of what's been going on is just regurgitation of stuff, but it's those repetitive cubicle jobs that are, and I actually work in an industry where there's a lot of automation going, even at the medium and small business level. It's finally become cost efficient enough, and the platforms are there that they can do that. And here's the beautiful thing that I actually realized with that, Tyler, is AI is going to force people out of those repetitive, soul-crushing jobs in cubes, and they're going to have to go out and figure out a way to do things that are truly human. And those sorts of things require creativity. Quite frankly, a lot of, let's just say the trades are actually things that you're just not going to easily replace with AI. Those things, because there's a certain amount of creativity and dexterity, and you talk about the exceptions. You want to be a guy who's out trying to figure. Yeah, you can have all the blueprints in the world, and then they run into all these problems. And the guys will go out and have a cigarette, and they'll kind of look at it a little bit and think about it, and all of a sudden they'll figure out a solution that isn't to do it. So one of the interesting things that I think might happen with some of this AI, it's just one of the benefits of it's going to be is it might actually send people out of those cube farms and trying to figure out to have what I think might be some of those more human jobs. And then the thing I'm talking about, so as you talk about getting people to encounter, I think the real world, or those things that are dynamic, like walking through a forest, between walking through the cube farm is under fluorescent lights and all of those other sorts of things, is trying to get them to experience life in that way, which I think I fully understand that dynamism. And then you'd also talked about, and I'm not going to be too specific, but you talked about you with some other folks in a secular world were realizing they needed to get people to have some kind of transcendent experiences, like through a weekend exercise or workshop or something, maybe using substances that might freak some other people out. But then are you trying to get people ultimately to that place where they get to that, let's just say, meditative sort of place where they can actually go into themselves? And
I've never espoused some kind of weekend retreat for psychedelics or some forceful transcendent experience. I don't think that's a good thing. I think there's a necessity to contact with the divine if one wishes to perform a certain role in culture. Not everyone experiences what we would call something like contact with the absolute, nor is it required. I think in order to manifest or to transform into a certain kind of thing, that's an aspect of it that triggers it. But yeah, that's certainly not a prescription that one can say is universal. And the people that are doing that are essentially they're evangelists for like hyping the ease of the power one can wield with something like a psychedelic substance, right? You can just give somebody something, like a doctor, right? You can just give somebody something, like make something happen.
Yeah, to be specific, we'd had a conversation offline on a Discord, and you knew some people that were trying to do something like that, and you were interested that they realized, like, one, trying to get people in some place, and let's just, however that could be, where they could experience the transcendent, let's just say something like that. And then what you realized is okay, that's great. How do then they actually take that experience with the transcendent and build it into something that they can interact with and relate to and connect with on a more continuous basis, something that they can take and have be a part of their life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so in a sense, in the way that pressure works, pressure balances out. So if I have a great will and I walk around in the world, it takes a lot of external effort to change me to be like that. That's what that is.
Absolutely. It's so hard as hell. I'm trying to do it. It's a battle I do every day.
Yeah, right. So some people are just incredibly strong-willed. Other people are not like this, right? Other people are like clay. They're shaped in every which way. And this, I think, is partly the distinction between sheep and shepherd. There's some beginning of a distinction between how that functions. Now, why it's that way, or how a person falls into that category, I'm not even going to begin to speculate here. But it's an inarguable observation of human beings that we do begin to separate into these categories, and it has to do largely with this sense of your will to change the state of the world, right? That's where it goes. So it's really difficult to give advice to those two classes of people because they often need to hear different things, and we find ourselves in different phases and sometimes mixtures of those different ways of being, especially as you become a parent. Right? To try to both play with my children and be a source of authority for them, it's very strange. It's very strange. Nevertheless, again, it's the cat chasing its tail. It's the reason for why there's a continual shunting of energy back and forth as a conversation between how I am and how I wish to be. Right? So I behave towards them in a certain way, and then I look at it and I say in my head, in conversation with myself, how could that have been otherwise? Or how did that feel? Was that great? Right. So yeah, I just feel like a lot of times what happens is, to manifest a control structure sufficient to govern a very large number of people, you have to play upon fear. And you fill that gap of fear, which is confrontation with the unknown. Right. So it's the more you pump it up, the bigger the unknown space you can, like the larger the monster you can stuff in that crack. Therefore, the more power you can, contain for yourself to fight it. The alternative to that is to make each individual as strong as possible, right? Such that no monster is capable of victory. And that, I think, in any realistic moving forward of us together, essentially a big part of what we're doing right now is trying to work that out together, right? Like, because that's what accelerates the proper alignment of the really difficult paradoxical structures of being. Like there's no way I could interrupt the process of the formation of the human embryo and be like, aha, I've got to figure it out, and I know exactly how to intertwine all this. That's a giant crazy mess. Like literally, like if I tried to map each contour and just look at the shape of it and what it's doing at any given moment, it's crazy. Nevertheless, it manifests in this thing. The gods laugh at human intentions.
Lost Gods needs to jump in here.
Yeah, come on, Lost Cause. Hop in. We can talk about Alexander. How do you know how he saw it? Well, Bobby, I think we've saved the world, frankly. I think we've done it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, it's good to see you. I wanted to keep this going, just getting you out here to share your thoughts.
Well,
with
and I'm around. Yeah, I'm around. I've gathered, I think, enough of what I need. So I'm going to be sharing my version of how I think a lot of people can be useful to each other. Try to get them coordinated a little bit. Because I think ultimately, my own intentions and many others are to exist in a way that I can raise a family together with other families, and like that the way of life would encourage like a way of service towards each other, and that like it would be in constant contact with the notion of inviting being into further being rather than like telling everybody what to do with a whole set of rules. And that's in fact what we're doing right now in disjointed, discontinued fashion in this great conversation that's taking place. Is we're all kind of we're trying to decide together ultimately when the collapses and the radical transitions do occur that we expect, that everyone kind of expects around the corner, either because they're diehard fans of Revelation, of John the Divine, or because they listen to Daniel Schmachtenberger, or because or because when Rush died, Rush Limbaugh, like that signaled the coming into the world. So yeah, I think there's an enormous amount of good work to do, and it's just now being realized by a large number of people. And I'd like to see them help each other out as much as possible. So that's going to be my service to this space, is to try to help coordinate some things.
Well, if you're looking for a 50-year-old soon-to-be empty nester that is trying to decide what he wants to be when he grows up.
Oh, I'd love to find in every way possible how I can work with you and all the other fine people here. Oh,
you bet.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I think it's a good place to land. That is good.
I think it is.
Thank you,
God
sir.
God bless you, Tyler. Have a good evening. Thank you,
too.
everyone.
We'll get you next time, Lost Cause. Next time.